long-term water augmentation committee meeting. Does everyone have an agenda? If you all have an agenda, we welcome you here. This is probably one of those real significant meetings, and the rest of them have been too. But we're looking to get some insight here and get our work done on it. Why don't we go around this morning and introduce ourselves. We'll go to the table and then we'll go to the outside perimeter. I'm Wade Noble. I'm from Yuma. I'm the chair of the committee. Why don't we start here with Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Kelly, General Counsel from Mojave County Water Authority, and I'm new to the table.
I'm Ray Blockberger, hydrologist with Salt River Project. I'm representing Bruce Howland, who unfortunately won't be able to make it, but it's in this regard.
What's the unfortunate part? I'm missing that. You can tell him I said that.
It's being recorded, I believe.
I'm Richard Humphreys with Carollo Engineers. I'm Carollo's project manager for this project.
I'm Juliette McKenna. I'm a hydrogeologist with Montgomery & Associates, water resource consultant. We're on the team with Carollo.
Cindy Rule, ADWR.
Jerry Walker, ADWR.
Brett Esplin, ADWR.
Stephanie Smallhouse, president of Arizona Farm Bureau.
Sarah Porter, File Center for Water Policy.
Bill Garfield, Arizona Water Company, new to the committee and new to the new Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation.
But not a new face to many of us.
Well, I'm old, so we share the same roots there.
Karen Modesto, ADWR.
Jake Winter King, Paul Water. Rich Minoz, Rise. Terry Meister, Yuma.
Nancy Meister, Yuma.
I'm Lupa from Colorado, West Virginia. Sophie McGuire, Arizona Farm Bureau.
Thank you very much. We do have some people on the phone. Would you introduce yourselves?
I'm Holly Richter with Conservancy, sitting in for Scott Deeney, who couldn't be present today.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Leslie, are you there? Well, she's logged in, but maybe she's not. Maybe she doesn't have her phone also logged.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh.
I'm getting my technical stuff in order. Apologies. Thank you. And then I'm going to mute myself.
And we have one more late entry back to the room. We need an introduction.
Oh, I'm Glenn Grant, just an interested member of the public.
Great. Glad to have you. Mr. Humphreys, we're going to turn the time over to you now to go ahead and review the draft report in all facets.
Okay.
Can I do that one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to introduce just really quickly our new website so that everybody can find where the committee's information is posted from this point on, because it's a new page. You mind?
Sure.
Can I do that?
I mind, but...
Well, that's okay. I can wait.
No, go ahead.
So, when the new Governor's Water Council is what we're calling it instead of GWAICC or whatever, a new web page had to be created for that new council and all committees and committee meetings that have been held subsequent to the March 8th inaugural meeting. So I wanted to show you there's two separate pages. There's one page of all of the prior stuff prior to the new Water Council, and then I want to show you where the new page is going forward. If you go here to this is our home page, and it's new.azwater.gov. And a couple ways to get to it, but right now there's under Hot Topics. It's pretty easy. We're right here. Can everybody see that? Maybe I'll move it up a little bit. If you just click on that, it'll take you over. But where I think it could get a little complicated, this is where, you see GWAICC here, this is where all the old stuff is prior to March the 8th. If you want to find that going forward, you have to come over to the sidebar and get on our news site. So then you see all of our, the 2 committees that are still standing, and here we are here, and everything will be posted. We have the upcoming meetings, and then what you'll see in about a week or so is I always post a summary of the meeting. It's not minutes, it's a summary and a recording, and then any presentations that I can put. We are not putting the draft, the study, we're not posting it anywhere. We're not making it public anywhere yet because it is still draft and liable to change, as we know around this table. So, one other way real quick, in case I think this hot topic may go away, that little tab, this little thing that you could, but how you can always find us is just under programs, and we're over here. Then it gets you to the same place. Okay, thank you. And good luck with that.
So the new homepage is new.azwater.gov.
Yeah.
Okay. To start out, let me just give some overview of what we're hoping to accomplish in this meeting and what some of the key objectives and outcomes would be. Our hope is to be able to walk away from this meeting with approval from the committee to proceed and prepare a draft report with the various work products that we've been working on since May of last year, with the hope that we would, in June, we could provide a draft report to the committee and get the committee's feedback and input on that before finalizing the report in July. So, and the way, well, I'll go through and just list the various documents that you have in front of you so you can see what is here. In addition to the meeting agenda, we have a draft report outline, and then we have a list of what we have been calling fact sheets. And these fact sheets is a compilation of information about various water augmentation projects and ideas that have been discussed and winnowed down to this point. We also have a table of costs per acre foot that can be compared with other types of water augmentation, and a graph showing that variation that we can get to near the end of the meeting. We have a document listing major activities for ocean desalination that I want to address when we get to that part of the discussion. We have a table and a set of definitions of various permitting requirements and activities that would be required for some of the different projects, and we don't need to get into a lot of detail into that unless you're interested, but I provided it there for your use. We have another sheet that lists the various water augmentation projects and best practices that would apply to various planning areas throughout the state of Arizona, so you can kind of see where we see potential benefits. And then we have 2 maps listing projects, one 0 to 30 years and then one 0 to 60 years, that have various projects identified. The way I envision going through today's meeting is focusing primarily on the report outline, although I don't envision going through the outline in the same order that the outline is here for a couple of reasons. One is, if we look at that just briefly, I want to talk about the executive summary near the end once you've seen and had the discussion of everything else, so then you can have the project components and ideas in your mind for discussing how we want to message that in the executive summary. We have introduction, We have a section 3 that talks about the evaluation process. Section 4 is impediments to water augmentation. 5 is augmentation ideas that may require further development beyond this project. Section 6 is best practices that improve water utilization, and we're definitely not going to talk about that one first, so we can avoid having a conversation about conservation. Section 7 is projects and practices between willing parties that improve water utilization. And then Section 8 is water augmentation projects. That is one that in the last meeting or two has been addressed near the end of the meeting, and I want to talk about that section because it's very important before we're burned out. And then we can talk about cost conclusions and possibly recommendations at the end at the same time we talk about the executive summary. Now, since we've had some changes to the committee and we've wandered through the process that we have over the last year, before getting too far into the details of any of this, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask any questions, or if there's some catching up or anything you would like to get, we can discuss that now.
Wade, I have one comment that I'd like to make, and I probably should have made this suggestion ahead of the meeting, but was delayed in reviewing it. And I would propose a change in the order in which things are addressed. And I would like to see if anybody else agrees with that. The proposed change that I had was focusing more on what the original goals of this process were at the front end of the report. So I would propose the first thing being the water augmentation evaluation process, followed by the actual water augmentation project, and then follow that by the water augmentation project cost summary. And then kind of move the other things towards the back of the report. I thought after the summary could be the best practices that improve water utilization, then that projects and practices between willing partners that improve, and then next having the concepts that require further development with the impediments to water augmentation coming last. I just thought it maybe put a more positive spin on it and put forth the things that we were trying to do in the process first, and then had those other things follow in the body. So
I definitely agree with that.
Richard, what do you think about that?
Can you very quickly give me the order so I can write it down and make sure that
I can give it to you, but that's
in order? Okay.
yeah.
I can write it down.
I can write it down too. Yeah.
Well, I just need to look at it quickly.
Just digesting.
Yeah.
You.
I just don't like having the evaluation process and then the next thing being impediments. We know we have them, but maybe we don't just have them right at the front.
Is it necessary for the executive summary to track the organization of the report?
Well,
Because it is good to sort of, I just think it's good to make sure that we acknowledge somewhere, and maybe it's in the introduction, that there's an acknowledgement that the impediments are significant in some instances. You know, that we've made sure to have a discussion of these impediments because they are, by every definition, impediments.
Okay. I'm good with that if everyone else is okay.
Sure.
Are there any others that wish to comment? Go ahead.
So I'm one of the newbies, but I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Be surprised.
And so just a basic question, and I'm sorry if this is annoying, but it might save on annoying questions later. Could you, and hopefully it can be succinctly, just describe what the final goal is from result from this report? Is it just to give it to the council and say, this is what we studied and now go forth and figure out what you want to do? Or like what is the hope from this report?
In answering your question, I will first say that is something the committee has struggled with for most of this time, so.
Okay. So maybe that answers my question.
In one form or another, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, so I would just chime in, being here from the very, very beginning, before we even had Carollo on board. It was Maureen George's concept, this concept was Maureen's, and that what she wanted to achieve was an evaluation of what the augmentation options are and their availability / feasibility to all of the planning areas statewide. So that sounds really easy, and so part of what was developed were the augmentation options. And then there were some evaluation criteria that were developed to be used in looking at that feasibility or availability to a particular planning area. So it sounds very simple, but when you actually try and achieve that, I think what we've struggled with is we've evolved over time on what that will look like and how complicated it will be. If you think of the 22 planning areas and the 14 augmentation options and the 22 evaluation criteria, it came up to be this huge matrix that was not even anything that Carollo could achieve for the dollars that we had and the time that we had. So I still think that overriding goal is the same, but what we use to evaluate that feasibility has gotten pared down to some extent. So I believe that what Maureen wanted to have was that analysis that could definitely be presented to the new council that says this is the work that we've done in this committee, but also that she wanted to then, outside of the scope of the work with the consultant, have the ability to, as a committee, go out to the planning areas and provide this product with this information and say, this is what we came up with, this is available to you, these are the things that we think are reasonable and feasible if you need to explore some augmentation options. And obviously part of that is information, but also solicit feedback and see if they agreed with what was come up with. So anybody else who's been here for the long haul have anything they want to add? I'm looking around, and Warren, you've been here the whole time.
No, Jerry did a great summary. I think to boil it down, what we were hoping to achieve was to provide to the 22 planning areas, here are some different ideas for looking at augmentation, what their feasibility may be, looking at different feasibility criteria, and they're not meant to be a recommendation. We're not saying this is what you should do. It's just, here's the ideas. Are any of these worth pursuing the youth now that we're done? And it was just to provide, I guess, a starting point, a menu for people to be able to talk about something a little more substantive than just need to do augmentation.
So the final product here is meant to be a very local document. You can take this document to local planners and show it to them once it's in its final form, is what you're saying.
It will have specificity that's applicable to each of the planning areas, but that was one of the problems. It's not too local, because that's where we run into many of those evaluation factors. Unless you have a specific project in a specific location, it's difficult to evaluate the entire feasibility.
Right, but I mean, it's like this is a very generic document.
Yes.
That can be a tool to local planners.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we have grappled with our own sense of humility, and that people in Phoenix, not all necessarily from Phoenix, but people coming to this meeting that's part of the Governor's Water Augmentation Council, and, you know, that we don't mean for it to be restricted. We're offering it with, like, if it's helpful, please use it. And it has been, it's a very rich, deep dive into a lot of different questions, but nobody wants it to be taken as like a prescription, or even as saying nothing else goes, because we haven't made that kind of evaluation.
Yeah.
I think another issue, because I was on the committee originally before I became a contractor, is what it doesn't include, and this was explicit when it was scoped, is it doesn't include any community outreach, it doesn't include any outreach or involvement with tribes. And so I think that humility about where it doesn't go needs to be explicit.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a new person here, but I get the sense from the outline of the executive summary, it's a lot more than the executive summary. And, you know, my experience has been if the executive summary is too fraught with details, you got to capture the person in the executive summary to get them to read the rest of the report, right? So I know you're probably not intending to have the executive summary be 15 pages. If it is, you know, stick a fork in my eye or something, but just a suggestion that the executive summary necessarily shouldn't have to follow the order per se. I mean, it should have all the elements encapsulated in a summary form. So that's just a suggestion, so that it not be overly lengthy. The body of the report will provide the details. So the hardest work sometimes is in the executive summary, because you have to do it in such a form that you capture effectively the conclusions and the analysis in a very summary fashion. So, just a suggestion.
And one of the things we talked about in our last meeting on the executive summary is that there's going to be multiple audiences that look at this, and it may be that the executive summary needs to be tailored so that those individuals who, for whatever reason, are not going to go through the report, they can get the essence of what's most important here for them. One of the things I'll add also, as far as one of the objectives for this particular study, in addition to having the information for each of the different planning areas, there was also a desire to look way out into the future and say what's our next bucket of water, and what could that be. So the committee wanted to get down to the point where there were 5 sorts of larger projects long-term that could be talked about. And we say long-term, that's the next 60 years or so. So we try and touch on both of those in the work and analysis that we've done.
And I would say that objective came later as we have evolved. This is probably the biggest nightmare for the consultant, because we have been a completely evolving process as we've moved through this. But that was, Maureen, one of the later objectives was to have a look at what that next big pot is in the longer term, and hence but not a whole lot of specificity in that with regards to ocean desal. You know, she said just the process. What does the process look like? We're not going to know how it's going to go down 60 years from now, but in general, what are the steps in the process? So that is where that ocean desal, that large project, kind of came out of.
Richard, we know that this report's going to be produced both on paper and electronically. So in the executive summary, what's the possibility of putting hyperlinks in? In other words, if I want to go just see that section, I can click on it. If I'm in the electronic version, it'll take me to it.
Yeah. We can do hyperlinks. We can also do a glossy brochure type of an executive summary as well, if that's what the committee wants.
Both are good ideas. Yeah, I think just having the executive summary, again, all too many of us will say, yeah, okay, that looks really good. be looking for executive summaries, but I will tell you that having the executive summary is perhaps a separate document, and also having the links inside the document that we can click on and go to will help others.
Yes. Okay.
With regards to rearranging the outline, are there any objections to the proposal by Jerry? Can you do it?
Let me clarify. Did you mean the outline of the report, or are you talking about the discussion in our meeting?
So I guess I always figured every executive summary that I've ever written has typically followed the outline of the report. So I was proposing this for the outline of the report, that it moves in this direction.
Okay.
So I guess it would be, I mean, if you're going to deviate from that in the executive summary, but the outline.
Yes, Senator.
Just to go back to the link, having a link with the work that Director has done at ADWR with Mexico and the desalinization would be really good. That's something that's often brought up to me as constituents. So any updated information from the Director on those, on the progress of desal in Mexico would be great, because I know that you've mentioned it several times that they've been meeting.
Okay.
That raises a different issue. That would be a link outside this report. Can we do that? I don't know. Is that possible?
Yeah, we can put links in.
Okay, so we can link outside the report as well as internal links.
Yes.
When is this report looking to be finished?
Oh,
That one won't be done till
220, 230, somewhere.
Sure.
As Maureen always said, this is a long-term water augmentation, so this is a long-term committee.
Let's get that report to link to this one.
No, it's supposed to be done really soon.
Okay.
So I would just comment, since Lisa made her comment, that the reason Brett Eslin is here is just for everybody's information. I'm leaving DWR on April 26th, and so...
Say it's not so.
Brett, yeah. So I brought that up to the Director, and there had been some comments raised by SRP about the ocean desal out of the last meeting, and so Brett has been participating. I don't participate in those discussions, and I'm not aware of what the current activities are. So that's why Brett's sitting in. He attends those meetings. He's working on the Minute 323 work, and so he'll be at least taking the department side and providing input on the ocean desal stuff. Thank you, Brett. With last-minute notice yesterday. Can you be in an all-day meeting?
Are we ready then to go to item number 4 on the agenda? Is that where you're headed, Richard? Or do we have more on the draft report outline?
Well, what I was envisioning doing is discussing all the different items as we go to that appropriate section in the report outline, so that you can...
So we're going to take the project fact sheets as part of reviewing the report outline, and you're going to reorder the outline so that we get to the executive summary last.
That's correct.
So you're going to lead us right now, just starting where you want to start, and we're going to follow you.
Yeah.
We're in accord with that.
And
then we have one brief announcement to make before we launch into this. Lunch will be, Warren, I hate to tell you this, but lunch is going to be about 1 p.m. So if you can last until then. Okay. All yours, Richard. Take us where you wanted to go. Yes, Lisa.
I've got to get back to the Capitol too. I just wanted to make sure I came.
Do you want us to have your lunch brought in early?
No, I've got other lunches over there. But with that, I just wanted to also make sure that the executive order for the new governor's water augmentation innovation vote, all of this would be accessible to all members, especially members of the legislature for that. So
before you came in, we learned that we're renaming that the Governor's Water Council. Is that what?
That's our acronym that we're using.
Yeah, it's not, it has not been renamed. That's just how we refer to it instead of GWAICC or.
GWAICC.
Yeah, we're sticking with the new council.
Are you suggesting that this report be delivered to all the members? Or-
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think everybody needs to be on the same page. We had one meeting, and we're gonna have the next one, I believe, is in June. And so if, as soon as this is done, if all the new members can have all of the information so that, in advance, so that they're prepared for the June meeting, I think it would be really helpful.
When the council publishes it, we'll make sure it gets disseminated.
I don't know that it'll be done by June 13th.
That's what I was wondering. So I wanted to clarify, are you saying in draft form you want it available to the council or in final form? So, the next council meeting is June 13th, and we were talking about a draft of this being in June. So there might not be a draft, what we consider a discussion draft, available when the council meets in June. So
Perhaps if any of the information that you have ready for dispersion, especially anything that you pertinent for the members to know. I'm telling you, even some of these sheets that I'm just looking at, even before the final document is finished, I think it's better to have everybody just as well prepared. And I say that also for the legislators. Just to make sure that everybody's prepared and what they're coming to.
Tell you what, here's what we can do. If we present it to the council, then we'll make sure it's fine and we'll go ahead and present it to the legislature at the same time. So whatever we send in a draft form to the council, we'll send that to the legislature, make sure we get that clear to do that.
I just want to clarify, I'm not saying send it to the legislature, but for members of the legislature that are on
The council? Those are the ones you think ought to get it? Oh, okay.
Just so that they're prepared as
And
well.
they would get it certainly before the council meeting at which it's going to be discussed, because we'll get those materials distributed.
Because it will also be distributed, when the members of the legislature get a note was appointed, for example, I'm taking David Bradley's place in the Senate Minority Group. We also did that to our staff. So it's just better that everybody...
Is that public?
No. Did we give it to staff?
No, that you're becoming Senate Minority Leader?
I'm not designate for Senate Minority.
On the council.
On the council. Designate. No, I'm just a whip.
Okay, we'll make sure, we'll handle it in that way.
Perfect.
Is there a comment somewhere? Okay.
I just want to throw out, I really support that we give the updates to the council. I just ask for a little bit of leeway if we're not quite ready. I think giving too rough of a draft could create more questions and concerns than having more of a cohesive draft together. And so I know Richard's working hard to get that, and we've already, thrown a number of things at him, so I just want to make sure that we have something solid, something really positive to present to the council rather than just saying, well, here it's really rough and there's still more to be done and things.
But that's
find the right balance.
Find the right balance, and that's always a good thing when handing anything to a member of the legislature.
Yeah, and Warren, I don't see this committee sending anything to the council that we're not ready for them to adopt. And it's true that we'll send it to them, and there'll be those who will comment and say yes, 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 and they'll either give us good comments or they'll micro it or whatever, but when this committee's ready, we'll send it up.
Okay.
And that may not be until the September council meeting. But it could also be ahead of that meeting via email that at least everybody would have it once it's, ready.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, should we dive into the next one?
Yeah, see if you can get done for one.
Lead us.
With whatever it is you're gonna dive into.
Okay. So the next item is the evaluation process, which in the document in front of you would be section 3. Our view is the intention of this section is to go through and discuss what we did and how we went about it and why we did what we did in such a way that the reader can have an understanding that we did go through a logical process to be able to look at all the different options and look at what would benefit each of the different planning areas. There may be any number of reactions from readers on what the process is, and the process has evolved fairly significantly through this project, and so what I envision is we would start out and we would talk about where in the beginning we did prepare a matrix of augmentation options with each of the different planning areas. We tried to identify those that could immediately be crossed off the list as being infeasible or inappropriate for one reason or another. Then from there we had an evaluation process and we looked at it and we decided we needed to change some of the criteria, and part of the challenge we had was that the information to be able to do the evaluation was just not there, and rather than necessarily documenting all that, I envisioned going and saying that the next step is we came up with the concept of water augmentation projects, and we looked at those and tried to come up with some definition and substance behind each of them with references to other sources of information, looking at costs, permitting, water that might be available, and so on. So we had something to be able to look at each one of them and evaluate and compare them. And then we had a process working here as a committee where we discussed each one of them and what their importance is and what the benefits are and what some of the areas where committee members were just uncomfortable with. And so we narrowed those down, and then we also regrouped them in ways you can see from the report outline, where we've got several different areas. For example, those requiring further development, those that are good ideas and they're best practices, but they don't represent water augmentation, and so we group those separately. There are others that are good ideas to implement between various interested parties, but are not necessarily a statewide thing, and so we grouped those, and then finally we came down to just a few augmentation projects. And then from there, we're going to list the ones that we see as augmentation projects, and we're going to describe all the others in the various categories that they fit into as a documentation of that. And then those that can be priced, we have some high-level price estimates that have been developed primarily for the purpose of comparing one option with another, so that someone in a planning area could look and see what the relative cost for them might be, at least in a very general sense. So, expanding on what I just said over the next several minutes is what I envision putting in the water augmentation evaluation process. Are there any additional thoughts or details that anyone has on that you want to discuss?
I thought.
Okay.
I think the original matrix and some of the work that we looked at comes from the WRDC, and I think we should at least make reference to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do that and put that as sort of a starting point.
And include a hyperlink.
Okay, do that too.
Nobody wants to go back.
And say, where are you going to link to? I don't even know where that is anymore.
Well,
I think you're describing the time portal.
PDFs in the dark.
Any other thoughts on the evaluation process? Okay. So now let's talk about the water augmentation projects that we're going to go forward with, and so that would be section 8. First, before we dig into that too much, there's a new one that you had us add, Wade, that I'm wondering if we should discuss where we want that one to go. The phreatophyte removal.
We should discuss phreatophyte removal and revisit it, because my recollection is, and it's vague, that we talked about this a long time ago and believe we made a decision not to include it. That's what I would like to revisit. Does anybody remember discussing phreatophytes at one time?
That was before my time.
I was in the meeting where it was discussed.
And now you're asking, should we put it back in?
Jerry, do you remember?
I'm old, Wade.
That's why we thought you would remember.
You were here. I can't remember.
So Wade, this is, I mean, that's something that I would be interested in discussing, but not having been here. So that 8.1 is something that was just added?
Yes.
Yes.
Why is phreatophyte removal different from,
Forest restoration.
yeah, or water, or section 5? I'm curious about the
Well, we could,
placement. Why would
I place it here just as an initial spot, but if you were to ask me today where it should go, I would put it in with the cloud seed,
That's where I would-
forest restoration, is a similar category.
That's the only thing that I recall, Wade, from it was talked about that it was in kind of the same discussion about a forest and watershed management, but I'm not recalling specifically. May have been a meeting I wasn't at.
Okay.
But I think it is something to at least have, as Richard's suggesting.
No, Richard reacted to a suggestion that he received.
Oh, well.
Okay. This is not Richard bringing this forward.
There is a suggestion of having it at section 5.
And I added a sheet on it like the others, just so we have something, some level of substance for discussion here.
And if I can, I just want to say there are bills moving through the legislature right now that are addressing portions of this problem. And hopefully they will continue to move, and there'll be money in the budget for it. And I think it's important to be included in the report, because, you know, this is going to be a long process. The legislature may move on it, they have the support, and with fingers crossed, it'll be in the budget. So I think letting everybody know that this is something that the committee was talking about before it appeared in January is a good thing.
Mr. Chairman?
There, go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, I had mentioned this at the council meeting, not knowing kind of what was going on here, but I think it deserves, I mean, I would agree with Sarah, maybe it belongs in section 5, but I definitely, Senator Rotondo, that I believe that's mostly focused on salt cedar, is that correct?
Right.
I think that it deserves a serious discussion, because I feel like if you're going to talk about fallowing agricultural land, then you need to talk about what grows in that same footprint once land is fallowed in a lot of these areas, especially along river. And many times it's invasive, and it may be native, but it's invasive. And I think that, you know, if we're talking about different conservation practices and best management practices on agricultural land, there needs to be a serious discussion. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it because you get into other environmental and habitat issues. But just like with forest, you know, restoration and forest management, I mean, we need to take a serious look at other vegetation that's like a million straws into the groundwater, and I don't think people are really talking about that. And so I think it deserves some, at least recognition in the report that it needs further study.
And Stephanie, to that point, I just want to say that the issue is deeper than that. If you look over near Buckeye and that Superfund site, And when those salt cedars are growing out of control like that and flooding occurs, what would happen if it took out that Superfund site? And what would happen to that aquifer? And what would happen to the water in the Welton and Mohawk and Yuma valleys if that water is contaminated with sewage? I think when you're talking about water, you have to talk about salt cedars and, well, all of these.
Yeah.
Because some of the ramifications of flooding and everything else has much deeper concerns that we could be potentially destroying other aquifers or, you know, or the river.
And I think there's real potential on your smaller, you know, on the Verde, smaller districts, and then whether it's the Verde or the San Pedro or some other area, where there needs to be discussion, because I think a lot of people think that they're augmenting the groundwater supply when they fallow farmland, and then when you have, you know, that same footprint grow into 1,000 mesquite, you're not augmenting the water supply. So I think the discussion needs to be in there. So.
This is Holly Richter with the.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to concur with those comments, and I think this is a really important conversation to have from the Nature Conservancy's perspective as well, because it's very hard to just say that all natives are good or all non-natives are bad, or I think it does get to a lot of these issues that were raised, and we'd really like to have that conversation, because I think it could benefit both conservation interests and agriculture if we could come up with some innovative approaches to sorting all that out.
The salt cedar example is really good because we have a history there of a number of programs that have looked at the problem. There may still be some ongoing. I know that there was a major effort a few years ago on this particular issue on a regional basis, multi-state. Some of the issues that I do recall coming from it were the habitat issues, and I don't know how that finally resulted, but worked out, so haven't heard about that. But we do recognize that phreatophytes, which is really different than forest, because your phreatophytes are mainly along your water courses. You're looking there at some of them really sucking up a lot of water. I know the Colorado River did studies, Reclamation did studies there, and it's a tremendous thousands of acre feet every year that are being used by phreatophytes. Now, does the Sierra Club have any information that they can share with us on this?
To that point, report prepared for you at the moment, but I could get you.
Yeah, could we get some comments?
To that point, 50,000 acre feet in Buckeye alone.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah. Of course, didn't that area need some of that sucked up?
Yeah. Well, when you know, the problem is when it's blocking the flow of the Gila, and then it flows into all that farmland out there. You're, well, familiar with it.
Well, Richard, what does the discussion of phreatophytes and that as a source of water augmentation, what would that entail as far as this report is concerned?
Well, what I'm envisioning, based on what I've heard, is we put that in Section 5. We have a discussion about what the potential benefits are and what some of the issues and challenges are for phreatophyte removal here in Arizona, so that it's documented. We've identified a potential.
There might already be some mapping done as well. Yeah.
I'm sure Nature Conservancy and Sierra Club have a lot. There's also the Tamarask Coalition, which goes really beyond Tamarask, and they're really quite a brain trust. I want, if I may, I'd like to highlight what we normally, I think what most of us think of when we hear about phreatophytes is the really worst, especially Tamarask invasive. But this point about encroachment when fields are followed is an important point. So it's almost a separate area of research. So I think I know it's done. But I've gone to a couple like mesquite encroachment conferences. So I'm sure there's some research out there. It's a very it's a separate and important.
Well, and I noticed, the reason I bring it up too is because in the, I'm not sure what this portion of the document is called, but I'm confused here with all the titles. You know, saying that potential benefits for fallowing is allowing that area to naturalize. Well, sometimes you're not going to if you do that. And I also think that if it's going to be, if it is going to be included in the report, I think it would be better to present it in terms of phreatophyte management, not phreatophyte removal. Because I think people tend to think, oh, we're just going to, we're just going to clear out all this, we're going to clear out all that. I mean, that might be the case with salt cedar. It's easy to demonize salt cedar because it's not native, right? But other species that are native, you know, it becomes this either-or discussion, which it doesn't have to be. It can be just about managing it in terms of...
And to that point, anybody that knows these trees knows long-term to keep them out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I agree.
All right, Richard, why don't we, who have contacts, have them get in touch with you as quickly as possible to give you the information that they have developed over the course. I'll get in touch with Reclamation, find out who's spearheading the programs there, probably the Corps of Engineers, because some of it's on the Colorado. They probably have some program or somebody who's involved with it. As we get into that, we'll find out how the discussion has evolved so that we get all the perspectives that play into it that you can then feed into this section.
Okay.
If that will work. I know it's late. I know this is a completely different topic that we haven't been working on, but if you could accommodate it, there's a strong interest in it.
Okay. All right, we'll address that then.
And just a point of clarification, we're talking native and non-native species?
Yeah, I am.
If we can find information that helps us, we know that there will be significant amount of information on non-native, on salt cedar. There'll be a lot of information on that. I don't know if there's been any study or work done that would include native plants.
I have gone to mesquite encroachment conferences, and so I know there are, and that's in southeastern Arizona where there's a big issue about groundwater, the effects on groundwater. So,
you got half those mosquitoes.
You need some, but there's definitely an issue.
Having grown up in southeastern Arizona and knowing what
that's why we say management, not removal.
Stephanie, this was very
I think that point that you take the water, you stop irrigating, and it doesn't necessarily.
If there are.
Well, if you take something out, you need to replace it because, or otherwise it just comes back.
Or manage it.
Yeah, manage.
I've got to go back to the Capitol. I'll call
you made your contribution by being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming so much.
I'll talk with you later and get a rundown.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things to do this week.
Okay, perfect.
And Warren didn't grab your hand while you
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, so let's jump into the details of the other augmentation projects. And for that, there's several documents we will talk from. One will be these two maps that each of you have in your packets. One map has projects that would be implemented anytime over the next 30 years. We have removed from the map the items that we're calling best management practices and those items that require further investigation, although we left them on the legend just as a reminder so you can see them. And then the next figure for the time period 0 to 60 years is for really one augmentation project that has multiple parts. So there's several projects that build up to that. And then in your fact sheets, let's focus on the ones that say that project 2 is groundwater desalination, second groundwater desalination, ocean desalination with the Colorado River Exchange, and then ocean desalination in the Sea Cortez to deliver water to central Arizona.
you have page numbers on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, beginning on page 27 of 36,
Okay.
going through page 35. And these three projects are the ones that we feel fit most into new water supplies. It's not just managing an existing supply differently, but it's a new supply. And so if we look at the map, what you can see here, this is the 0 to 30 years map, where we have identified it with an icon, the brackish desalination. These are locations where Montgomery and Associates and others have identified areas of brackish groundwater that could potentially be developed. They are not necessarily being developed today because the price point for brackish desalination is not there yet. Yes. And the thought is that in the future, perhaps technology will become better for removing the brine and managing it, and we also fully expect the price of water to go up, and so at some point, brackish desalination would become a more viable option. And brackish desalination actually gets to a number of the different planning areas. It gets to the Northwest Basins, Navajo, Hopi, East Plateau, Central Plateau, Basin Range AMAs, Lower San Pedro, Gila, Cochise, West Borderlands, Lower Gila, Colorado, Main Stem South. And so what we would do is put the information that we have about brackish desalination in a section of the report. We're envisioning these fact sheets that we've put together have been very useful to get us through to this point in the project. When we go to documenting things in the report, it may be that a different format is more appropriate, and it may be that some of the items on the fact sheet that were useful to help us in comparing options are not necessarily what we may want to put in the report documentation. And I don't have a sample of that prepared, but this is a concept as we're thinking about this. And so we essentially have 3 pages of brackish desalination information that we would put in a section of the report.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question on this.
Go right ahead.
Richard, under water yield, you show up to 10,000 acre feet per year. Is that, there's a number of brackish projects shown on here, potential projects shown on here. Are we talking about, for all of these projects, the maximum you would get out of any one of them is 10,000, or?
The 10,000 came from estimates of what amount of groundwater might be there on a long-term basis. Not all of these, I think there are 6 where you could go up to 10,000. There are additional ones where the potential might be up to 5,000 or 6,000 acre feet a year.
So it is generally meant for each of these planning areas where we've identified brackish as a potential augmentation?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And although the studies that have been done identify general areas throughout the state where brackish groundwater exists, if someone was to go and implement a project, they would need to do additional groundwater studies specific to the area that they would put it in.
Understand.
Nick, have you cross-referenced these to the USGS brackish groundwater studies?
Not in detail. I've seen that, but I haven't gone and compared one to one. And the areas of that study and the Montgomery study are a little bit different. But part of the area, we can compare them.
It seems like it'd be good to do a sort of high-level cross-reference to make sure that there aren't big differentials, in which case we would want to think about whether we want to, including that as an option in that planning area.
I don't think there's different areas, do you?
Planning areas, I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at it this way, but probably not.
Yeah, the areas are the same. The differences are, the report we did, estimated volumes, which need to be refined. The GS is looking at water quality data on a finer scale, but the general outlines of areas are still relevant, yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions on brackish groundwater desalination?
Go ahead.
I have something, if I may, that Mr. Bill Palmer called this morning and wanted to attend today's meeting, and he is sick and decided not to call on everyone. So I'm carrying forth his comments. He had two that he wanted me to voice, and one of them does relate to desal, both groundwater and ocean. And what he would like included somewhere is just that that we need more research in order to bring the cost of the desal process down.
That's it. Great. So now do it. Let's do it.
Did you have some?
No, I don't. No.
Okay. So now let's go to the two ocean desalination projects. And we revised these slightly from what you saw at the last meeting. And the reason we did was because last meeting Chuck Collins was here to talk about what CAP is doing and what they're hoping to accomplish. And so the revision that we made was that, and just for anyone that's not familiar with, CAP is doing some feasibility studies. They hope to locate ocean desalination facilities where they could do an exchange so that, you know, let's say they come up with 200,000 acre feet of water that from the ocean desalination process, they would provide that to Mexico in exchange for Colorado River water that they could then take and use. So there's several sites, and I think they intended to have like 50,000 MGD plants. Excuse me.
5 locations.
5, okay.
And we're looking at any technologies between 100,000 up to 200,000 acre feet a year.
Okay. At each of the 5, or? Okay.
So the suggestion would be one location, one technology, one brine management process, one brine dispersion method at a single place. So I'm kind of curious why it seems like you're kind of double doing work for 14 and 15.
In the sense that
the minute 323 by national committee is already looking into this.
And that's what, so we're on the phone setting that process to desalination, maybe scratching that, just having some reference to the efforts going on, especially DWR is co-chairing that effort, acknowledging this should be involved in the state's process, but we don't need to redo the work like you said, just kind of have reference to what's currently going on.
Correct, because the problem is that you're looking at a binational team. So we have Mexico engineers, we have people from their water authorities that we work with, and we're all in a big group, we're all trying to get this done together. And if you come up with something that's not in line with what we come up with as a group, and then somewhere down the line somebody says, well, Mexico, you need to do this, and they say, we weren't part of that discussion, where did that even come from? And you kind of get into a little conflict that you probably don't want to start.
So can I, a point of clarification, you said for 14 and 15, what are you looking at?
Oh,
Sorry, the project number, the cost sheet?
Okay.
it's on a different,
There we go.
yeah, it's on the There we go. So could I just ask for some clarification, Richard, and I feel like I'm being somewhat obtuse in this, but so we have these things that have the project descriptions which look very similar to the fact sheet, except we say for the ocean desal it says Project 3 and Project 4. So were these documents going to be presented in this form somewhere with the other fact sheets, or was this going to be written up under a project description, and then how does that differ from the single sheet that we have, which is looking at these major activities to implement ocean desal? Because they these to me appear to be kind of the same, this major activities. Is it reflecting the same material? And I haven't gone through and looked at each of the steps. Is it reflecting largely the same material as is written in these fact sheet kind of setup? And then the other question I had was that based on comments that Chuck made last time, you eliminated the concept of any ocean desal where the water originates in California, and so we've moved solely to water originating in Mexico, but it looks like you proposed doing it two ways. One, I'm assuming, is just a direct delivery, and one is an exchange. And then I think that comes into what you're talking about is, and I guess the question is I didn't know enough to speak last meeting about when Chuck said we need to completely take it off the table that there's a possibility that there could be ocean desal in California. Because I don't know enough about, I'm not participating in the DCD conversations, but I guess I would ask the committee members sitting here today, is that the general agreement of everybody that should be completely removed from this and there shouldn't be any consideration of a source of water being desaled originating in California?
California would never agree to transport water into Arizona.
They would never agree right now, but we're looking at something 60 years out, and who knows what they would agree to 20 years from now or 30 years from now.
Is it necessary anyhow? Yeah, the location doesn't matter very much in exchange. In a way, I think what we took away from what Chuck said was kind of similar to when we thought about, should we do Missouri River, pipelines? It was like, we shouldn't go there right now for lots of reasons beyond just, is it possible? And so my vote would be, I think he made a pretty good point. We should keep it off. Presumably, everybody thinking about ocean desal with an exchange could stretch their imaginations to think of desal with California in addition to desal with Mexico. I don't know.
You really don't want to poke any hornet's nest before we go into the negotiations.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it would be good if we stay with, kind of be in line with what is happening with the desalination efforts that are going on right now.
Yeah, we are using a different contractor, but they have a Mexican counterpart. So we actually, we have a Mexican contractor that's looking at permitting and costs that are actually in pesos versus US dollars. And that's a $600,000 effort. So it just seems like this is a duplication of work that may be able to be spent elsewhere.
Well, we can certainly align it. It's been on the list here for a period of months. The last meeting was the first time Chuck came and gave his input, and that was the first that we had. So certainly happy to take input and align however we need to, but from a historical standpoint, it helps to have someone in this meeting and the table to be able to communicate those things so that we can incorporate them.
I agree.
So hence why Brett's here. because I think Brett will be, and maybe, work with you, Rita, as well, to align whatever this is going, whatever way it's going to be presented, if it's going to be presented in tabular form or if it's going to be presented in textual form, and if it's going to replace this kind of step-by-step, I don't know, but to reflect what we're currently doing in the 323 process.
I thought it's why it's good to leave it in. When we look at this report and think long-term augmentation, the first thing they're going to say is why is ocean desal not on here? I think something needs to be on here. The problem with that project right now is so much in flux, it's hard to show the spot, even the kind of actual locations or whatnot. But I think, like Bart was saying, just keep it as general as possible, referring to that effort, acknowledgement, help the best people.
I mean, ocean desal is fine, but you don't need to say in Mexico or in the Sea of Cortez. Just talk about desalinization as a whole.
Okay. To answer your question, Jerry, and I've got a question for the committee on this as well. On these, what we have called fact sheets, this is where I'm envisioning what we've documented in the report being, we take this information or the part that's relevant and put it into a section, but we're not necessarily going to take a fact sheet and stick it in. The list of steps for augmentation is what the committee asks, yes, for desalination was what the committee asked for. And part of my question for you with this discussion is, do you still want that, or do you want us to try and get something that Net 323 group is working on and incorporate that, or do you want us to just deal with cost estimate ranges?
So
I'm open to whatever you want to do.
So I would say that the development of steps was when we still had the transportation of water from Missouri on the table, because that was one of the things that Maureen wanted looked at, and she said, I realize it's pie in the sky and everybody's going to think it's crazy, but if we're looking for those big pots of water, that's one of the only ones other than ocean desal that's out there. And I think we should at least have an analysis of how it would work. We're not going to say it's going to work. We're not going to say how much it's going to be, but an analysis of if we were doing it, how it would work. And so I think that was very pertinent to that particular option. And I don't know if that's as necessary for the ocean desal, if those are the things that how it's going to work are being worked out in some way. So I guess my answer to the question is, I think this was highly relevant when the Missouri River was on here. I don't know its relevance with desal, because I don't know enough about desal, is there still a framework of how it would work where you're not talking about specificity that would apply wherever you did it? I don't necessarily think it's going to be the same if you do desal in California versus desal in Mexico. I think the process will be different, so articulating a process would, I don't know that it's relevant now that the Missouri River thing has been pulled out. If we can get enough specificity, I don't think there's as much uncertainty about how ocean desal would work. Everybody thinks there's a place, you have to get agreement to do it, you have to put some infrastructure in, versus a lot of uncertainty about how transportation of water from the Missouri River.
And there is a real serious process that's part of a treaty
going on.
Yeah, with people really committed lots of time and resources and financial resources to it. So that's really different. I just happened, for fun to go look at the basin study and looking at, they took all options in the basin study, and some of the options were hauling icebergs and water bags and things, and not to mention diversion, transnational diversion of water. And there's a really cool table that evaluates the sort of feasibility. And what you're talking about, Jerry, reminds me of how, ocean desal, rose to the top, I think, of those augmentation options, as opposed to some of the other things, are much harder to achieve. we could maybe even reference the basin study. I can send you the link. Sure.
And one of the benefits of being a newcomer to this committee is not having the, I won't use the word baggage, but I'll use the word baggage of where we've been.
Oh, we've been lots of places too.
It sounds like we're stepping onto both sides of what we think this report should do and shouldn't do. It shouldn't provide specificity, but yet the Mexico desal is sort of going on the side of specificity versus the, and I'm trying to envision 60 years out, and if 300,000 acre feet is the ultimate solution of bringing water in from the ocean or exchanging in some way, I don't think that's going to cut it 60 years from now. So are we saying ocean desal with exchanges shouldn't be pursued? Because last I heard, California has a lot higher allocation to Colorado River water than Mexico does if you're going to do an exchange. And I don't think you need to say it's going to be California. I mean, they can figure it out for themselves, but there should be something in here, ocean desal. Otherwise, call this a 10-year report and not a 60-year report. It may take 60 years to turn the tide on people's thinking, but I think it needs to be a longer-term vision for this committee to tackle. So I don't think we should take it off the table, ocean desal. Not with specificity, but whatever the process would be. Mr. Chair.
Let's talk for just a minute about the two different ones that we had and why we separated them out. And this is the first time you've seen them separated this way, to get your feedback on that. And there's an assumption here that the CAP is funding the study for the investigation of what they're going to do. And so then comes the next question, who's going to get that water? And the first reaction, at least that I had, was that, well, it would probably be those in the CAP service area. But we also have an objective to see what other areas we can provide augmentation to, so not everything goes to the basin range AMAs. And this is where, on the other project, we had looked at providing water that could be obtained either in exchanges or with infrastructure that would pump the water to deliver it. While it potentially could still use a CAP canal, it doesn't necessarily have to use a CAP canal. But this would be water if arrangements could be made to do desalination, to deliver that desalinated water directly to Arizona rather than just exchanging with another entity and living within the constraints of what you can exchange. And so how do you feel about those two delineations? And the second one is much more expensive because there's a lot more infrastructure that would be required.
Can I speak to one thing really quick?
Sure.
The CAP is not the only funder. It's also DWR, SRP, Freeport, McMahon, Southern Nevada, and the Department of People in California. But before that funding was put in place, it was said that funding does not equate to where water will go. So we're all not only funding this, but it's not necessarily we're going to get equal amounts of, just to make sure that's good out there.
Yeah, I think characterizing it as a CAP project may be jumping the gun.
Okay.
This was the second Bill Plummer comment. He just had two that he really wanted me to lay on the table, and it was specifically about this project 4, about delivering with a pipeline. His comments are that it's a non-starter, it's way too expensive to ever happen, and the only way to talk about ocean desal is to talk about exchange. His comment.
So what do you want to do?
We're talking 60 years here. What is the affordability of that bucket of water in year 60? I don't know as we sit here today. And I don't think I'd want to take something off the table simply because in today's terms it's not one of the better options for us to pursue over the long term.
I really agree with that comment. Some of these things are very expensive, and right now, they're just not on the table at all. But even 10 years from now, if the drought continues on the Colorado River, if we continue to have drought conditions in Arizona, then there's going to be more money available for taking care of this primary need. 20 years from now, tables could have turned completely, and people look at that and say, I'm not even paying 1/10 of that amount. I don't have to because I've got it.
Yeah, I think these are just options, you know, right? And so if you decide to do them, but you don't say, I'm not even going to state an option because I don't think it's feasible.
It might be, might help Bill's objection, which I understand, to beef up some of the viability language in the description. I mean, it's pretty, if I didn't know anything about ocean desal, I might read all that language and say, okay, you know, but maybe we could talk about until less expensive water augmentation methods are exhausted. It might be even more than that, and all other conservation options and all voluntary reallocations. And some other things, you know, here it says special district, state level support or federal financing. Normally we require the water users to pay back, you know, to pay for their water. Maybe they get a federal loan or a WIFA loan, but again, it sounds easy to just get that big federal loan, and realistically that may happen, but we could make it sound, we could have some more cautionary language, I think.
Okay.
I think sometimes along the lines of all of those statements, I think sometimes it's helpful to have to continue to include those things which seem less viable and more expensive, because it gives you more incentive to work on the things that are within reach. You know, they seem like they're more, you can accomplish those things, you know, it gives you a little more incentive than saying, well, you know, we need to get work over here because we know how difficult it's going to be, instead of just acting like it's not there.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, and we've had discussions here in previous meetings talking about reclaimed water use and water conservation, which the committee hasn't wanted to highlight those because they're things that we're already doing now and may come across as being ordinary, and if we come up with a report that just says, well, you need to conserve water and you need to take care of your reclaimed water, that would fall short of the expectations for this. However, I think your point is very valid that before anyone is going to spend money on these kinds of things, they will already have to take care of their conservation. They will already be utilizing their reclaimed water because those are much less expensive options.
And that's something that you'll certainly emphasize in the executive summary. Yeah. That's the part everyone will read.
So the message I'm hearing is you leave the first one in, but not do it in such a way that it is CAP specific. We still do the other one, but we be very clear on the viability, the costs, and what needs to be done first to make those real.
When you say the other one, you mean delivery to Central Arizona?
Yeah, the number for the project 4, the pipeline versus the exchange delivery. And then that project 3 would be such that it will be in line with what's currently going on in 323.
Yes.
And then
now, another thing related to that is I've separated and put all the infrastructure that would have to go to some of the other planning areas in the second one. Mm-hmm. Is that the way you want to keep it?
Why wouldn't the same thing be available with a river exchange?
They potentially could.
I think we have to. reflect that.
One of the things that, in keeping it separate, one of the things that it does do is it makes the exchange one look much more economically viable, because there's a lot less infrastructure that you have to do. So it seems like, from a cost standpoint, you would want to do everything you should there first before going to the other ones.
But the exchanges are only for a very limited geographic area versus this would be applicable statewide.
I haven't put it statewide. I've just put it in there's more areas, but I haven't gone to the point of saying we could put that water everywhere in the state.
Right, but I mean, you have more than just one location it can go to, which is in the exchange is only into the Basin and Range AMA, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it broadens it. It's not statewide, but it's broader than just the AMA.
Yes. Now, another twist on that is a couple questions. We could also do some of the exchanges that we have in the 0 to 60 year one. We could move some of those up into the other one. For example, an exchange with Verde water, where water coming through the CAP canal could be used to satisfy, let's say, some SRP commitments and allow the Verde planning area to keep more of their water.
I don't think SRP would be very happy with that proposal, but it's here. You can speak for SRP.
Bruce didn't object to it in the last meeting.
I want to talk with him before explicitly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's another thing. We've got Verde, Lower San Pedro, Upper San Pedro, and Upper Gila all in a similar kind of an arrangement. And they've been there since December. And no one has objected to them, and certainly you can object to them now, but...
You mean when you're on the 0 to 60 chart, but not on the 0 to 30?
That's correct. And then the other one is the Colorado main stem north and south.
On which project?
Well, currently I have, on the map I have the exchanges for the 0 to 60 year, the project with the other infrastructure. And with the work going on with Minute 323, do you envision that exchanges being possible for Colorado main stem north and south? Or is that not a part of?
It would be a delivery point at NID or SID.
So that'd be the delivery, but the exchange could be, I don't see why it wouldn't be on the north or south. It could be.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I guess that's
if exchange is possible.
Yeah.
We'll have to figure that out too.
So could I ask a question for clarification? So on the 0 to 60, and talking about the exchanges, you just talking about the indication here for the Verde, the Upper Gila, and the Upper and Lower San Pedro. Can you explain exactly what the thinking was?
Yeah, the thinking is currently, let's take the Verde for example.
Yeah.
They have a certain amount of water has to be delivered from the Verde River down to SRP because SRP has that water right. If there was, the Verde Basin area is short on water and they would like to have more water. It's hard to get water there from an infrastructure standpoint. It would be very expensive. And so the thought is, to the extent that water is made available to entities that receive an SRP allocation, if that could be delivered through the CAP canal to those entities, then a like amount of water could be not delivered down the Verde River.
So it's relieving pressure.
Yeah.
Essentially. So really to these local areas, and then so like for the upper Gila, is that relieving pressure of the settlement or?
That's a similar concept where in the Upper Gila area, they have to deliver water.
Right.
There's also SRPs. Right.
Okay.
You know, realistically, those amounts are, like if we were thinking about the Upper Gila, it's probably very small amounts that could be made available through that kind of exchange.
Yeah, and probably on the Birdie. I mean, as we've talked about, small amounts would make a huge difference.
Yes.
But in the Upper Gila, I think where the conflict is mostly over water for agriculture, small amounts wouldn't make a huge difference.
And I've also assumed on this, because this water, the ocean desalination water is going to be expensive, I'm assuming that this is intended primarily for municipalities as opposed to agriculture.
You mean $5,000 an acre foot of water won't support?
68 rate.
But it still would relieve pressure. It would relieve pressure on agriculture overall, potentially.
It could.
Cabin's gonna have to raise 2% every year for the next 60 years.
I wonder if there's adequate explanation of all of this in the, I mean, it really is.
There would have to be a lot more explanation than what the fact sheets show. And that's part of my thought here, is that for the report, we need to move to a narrative that would include those explanations where the table doesn't communicate that very effectively.
And the other thing that is the degree to which existing delivery infrastructure in the SRP municipality would continue to work, I guess with the SRP CAP interconnect, it would be sufficient, right? But I mean, we want to factor in other infrastructure costs.
Yeah, and because we don't know anything about the size of that interconnect, we haven't made any attempt to cost it. And the costs that we have are fairly generic, and they don't include things that would inevitably come in when you get to be into specific projects.
Yeah, at this point, there's no preliminary sizing even for that.
Yeah. So on these various exchange locations, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to leave them as they are, or do you want me to change them in some way?
So I guess I don't understand what your question is, Richard. Are you saying, is everybody comfortable with all of these exchange locations? I think the direction is that it's not clear exactly what each one of these, how it would work without having that more explanation. But you're anticipating putting that more in the narrative in the report and not in the fact sheet. So are you asking, so I guess, I mean, that's what I've heard thus far, but I guess the question is, does everybody agree that every one of these should be on here? Was that your question?
That's part of it. And the other part of it is, since we agreed we would keep the two ocean desalination projects in, are there ones that should be shifted from one to the other?
A particular exchange is shifted
Yes.
from one to the other. So I think that's here, Brett. We have not done that to see if we think something should be shifted over.
Okay. So then, is that something you want to take as an action and then get back to me on?
I would like to. Does anybody else need to do that as an action item as well? Look at each of these?
Yeah.
And I hate to say it might be better, if you're going to prepare more narrative, it might be easier for us to make the choice whether we want them in or out once we do the additional narrative, so that we're actually understanding it exactly the way that you're intending for the exchange to work. If if this doesn't give us enough information, I don't know. I don't think I will be the person that will look and see if this gives us enough information, but does that make sense? I mean, you've got it kind of nutshelled here, but I think perhaps somebody's concern about a particular exchange option might be down more in the details and not necessarily up at the higher level. Are you thinking the same thing? Yeah.
So at a minimum, it's as if they're all equally possible, how they're written here, and there are other practicalities that would get in the way, and so, yeah, I think what you're saying is important.
That if you could flesh them out just a little bit more for people to look at them and have a little more understanding about whether they think they should stay in or come out.
Okay. We can do that. My one concern about me doing that is I may not necessarily have the information to give you what you need to be able to flesh them out and draw some distinctions.
We're not too proud to take text from you, too.
Right. Well, and what I was going to say then is if we don't have enough information, because these are ones that you're proposing as alternatives to the committee, I guess I might say if you don't have enough information, which is totally understandable, to talk about how it might work, then maybe those are ones that we should just not consider, right? Because we don't know enough about them to consider, or is that?
We could put them in section 5 and say
it needs more consideration. Right.
I would think that for each of the exchange concepts, we could pretty easily come up with a couple of people who could give us a rich amount of information about the feasibility and the impediments to each of those exchanges, and it would be, I'm sure it would be quite.
Well, if there was information available to do that, that would be great. My one hesitancy of just crossing them off because we don't have a lot of information is all of a sudden we're going against the objective of the project and we're pulling off options for planning areas that may not have anything else to them.
So I think a reasonable action item would be for all of us to look at these, however many there are, 3 through 11, right, where that starts in the upper San Pedro and goes down to Main Stem South. Look at that 3 to 11 and in 2 weeks' time get back to you whether we think it will work. Is that reasonable to folks? I think everybody's going to have to look at every single one of them. I think obviously, Wade, you're going to look at the Main Stem North and South probably pretty intently, maybe not necessarily look at the other ones so much. But so would 2 weeks, would that delay you a lot?
Any feedback you can give me within the next 2 weeks, so that puts us at the end of April.
Okay.
That's a time frame that we can work with.
Okay.
And what information are you looking for?
I think what you're looking for is, does the individual on the committee want this to stay on here as an exchange option? And if they know more about how it might work, they should provide you specific examples or language about how the exchange would work. Is that what?
Idea.
Yeah.
And there may be, I think something we should consider is some way of explaining or highlighting the feasibility or non-feasibility somehow.
Okay.
Project in line with.
Okay.
Okay, so can I make one comment? Because now that I have looked at this a little bit more and thought of it in a better context about this, which is the major steps, and now I'm arguing against myself because I said I don't necessarily know what its relevance is now that the Missouri River transportation has come off. But one of the things that, looking at this and I keep trying to think back to Maureen's words were, I think this would be, now I'm arguing back to I think it should be in there. But I think instead of a list of things, perhaps a graphic that, so you have apply for federal environmental permits. Well, that's a simple statement, but what does that mean? What's the time frame for what those permits might be? Doing things more like, that looks really simple, but we all know that that right there is a very complex thing to do, but I don't necessarily know that we all know what it entails. And the exchange agreement is approved by the U.S. government. How the heck do you get an exchange agreement approved by the U.S. government? What are the steps that we have to take to do that? How long is that going to take? Because some of these, it looks like you do 1 first, and then you do 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, but now you're down here at 11, it's complete the environmental impact studies. You maybe should have started that 20 years ago, because that's one of those things that's going to take a really long time period, and if you don't get to it until you're in step number 8, now you've delayed your project 20 years. So I think that's what Maureen was, how do all of the things work, and how long is it going to take, and how does something even begin to identify what they need to do first versus just a time series, you know, because I would say, 1 is that's what you have to do first, and of course that one is, but 2, conduct a feasibility study, that probably is the 3rd thing. You start negotiating an exchange agreement with Mexico, but do you do that before you even start your environmental, how long is that going to take, what permits are you going to need before you can even do that, that sort of thing.
And what you're describing is my discomfort with that list, which is why I was asking maybe, do we really want that on there? Because I don't think we necessarily have the information to do that. If we've got another group working on that, I would almost, I'd be happy to even have a flow chart or something that shows that. I like that idea, but maybe we take, is there something that could be shared?
But I don't think you guys are working on what is the time frame of the permits and that sort of thing. Are you, or are you?
So they are thinking about environmental,
issues like that. I don't know if we're going to specifically say we're doing right now identify that, but that would be the group that would take care of that process, I believe.
We are step 2. We are conducting a feasibility study.
So, but I do think that it's also knowledge to know that we don't know. So if you have the statement here that says, and the exchange agreement is approved by the U.S. government, if we don't know how that's going to happen, that's information and knowledge that if somebody's going to undertake this, they're going to say, we're going to have to, we know that this is going to happen, there's going to have to be some approval, but somebody's going to have to figure out who that approval person is.
So I know minute 323 does say, if any of these concepts were to be adopted, the next step would be a new minute to look into that.
Right. So for that exchange one under 323, but for the pipeline one, is it going to be the same, or is there going to have to be some other approval that's not minute 323? Is it not going to be through a minute? I don't know.
I mean, who's our audience here? I almost feel like this level of detail is more than anyone needs. People who are reading this aren't going to be looking to this as their manual for developing an ocean desal exchange. So could we just not say it's a lot of permits and it's going to take years and years? I mean, but then why do we need this level of detail? I kind of like what's here because I know NEPA, I know about the U.S. Bureau of Rec. I never had known about GWAICC. I mean, so I'm like, wow, I knew it would be a lot. What I wish is that this would have a some kind of time frame with each of it, like average years,
right.
Whatever. But I don't think the people that we're hoping will look at this report need a great deal of detail about the permitting process because they probably, that's not, this isn't what, this report is not to list out all of the necessary approvals and who are the approval agencies.
Right.
To that end, I think
The actual infrastructure, the permitting,
that's being handled by Minute 323 to some degree.
but the audience who would be looking at this would be wondering, how can that impact me?
And something that 323 is not even talking about what the actual exchanges in Arizona be. So maybe that would be the effort that Arizona should put forth, is saying, here's how some of the exchanges, if water were made available, could happen. So somebody in Verde could say, this is how maybe it could impact me, but not worry so much about the permitting and the construction and all that, you know. And that way we're not duplicating that.
Right.
And then reference the Minute 323 and the ongoing work.
Right, so I was referring to just the steps.
That one,
Yes, this is the one I was referring to, not in the fact sheet. So I was arguing we're back to the do we need this or do we not? If we don't, and I mean, it was something that Maureen wanted. Maureen's no longer here, so if you as a committee decide you don't want it, that's fine. But I do think that if it's going to achieve what Maureen wanted to achieve, it needs to have more detail on this piece. And then what Richard is saying is the problem is he might not have the information to put more detail on here. But not knowing the answer or the answer being unknown, I think, is also information, important information for somebody who's considering this, you know, in a different manner.
But I think the people that we're aiming for, my take would be, good effort, it was great that Maureen wanted it, and now that we can look at it, we can say that we really can't achieve what she was hoping for. I would like to see all over this thing, all over the whole report, that it would say, yes, there is a serious effort going on in Arizona to develop ocean desal, and it's part of a binational agreement. And the reason we need that is because so many people think it's not happening, and they need to know. And then as much as we can offload with references to the ongoing activity.
May I interject something, and Richard, you may not appreciate this later, but I do agree that Maureen wanted to see a timeline, and her issue was that if we in 40 years are expecting to have desalinated ocean water, and the process it will take 40 years, what do we need to be doing today? So to not miss the opportunity. And I'm wondering, Richard, if we could do even a schematic or cartoon Gantt chart with these concepts. And a Gantt chart is simply, an engineer's timeline of tasks and milestones. And usually you'll see them for a project on, weeks or months, but we could do it with a very broad brush stroke and question marks at the end. So, even 5-year increments where you show the things that could be started today, and then a question mark for when they end, but it would allow for that uncertainty. It would give the list of the steps, which I think we all agree on, and it would also put the binational process that's going on right now in that context.
Beginning, yeah.
And we haven't talked about this as a team, and it's additional task, but I'm wondering if that might work.
I don't have any problem with doing that. I just need to make sure that we get enough input so that it's meaningful.
Yeah.
If we can do that, then I'm happy with putting together a timeline or a Gantt chart or a schematic, however, to show that.
Has the binational group put together a big picture framework from from A to Z, from dream to water?
No, because when you get to negotiate an exchange agreement with Mexico, okay, well that's going to take 6 months on a very, very good 6 months, or it's going to take 10 years.
I guess.
But that could be fit into a Gantt chart.
Right.
If it is 6-year timeline.
You could do a clear, a color in them, like a pixelated, fuzzy color, to say it could go on into the future.
Is there any kind of a goal that's established with that as to when they might like this to come to fruition?
Our report is going to be published on April 2021.
Okay.
That is as far as we got.
And my fear would be that someone would look at the international process, binational process, and say, the state of Arizona says you should be in this range, and you guys are only here. There could be that conflicting, since the international process hasn't set up the timeline yet.
Well, but the one good thing is for number 2, we're in 2019, and I don't know when we started, but if we're looking at 2021, we can put a range, we can say 2 to 5 years, right, to conduct the feasibility study. That's how long they're saying it's going to take to do the feasibility study.
Sure.
And I think that in that schematic, it would be which things can take place even if other things are dragging. I think that's part of the process, right? Everything doesn't have to be sequential. There can be perhaps steps that can be, so we know that this exchange agreement might take 10 years, but are there other things that we can be looking at and laying the groundwork to start doing while we're waiting for that exchange agreement? I think that's part of that, process and the time frame.
Chart.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot on that list that's not happened yet. So there's no way to say, oh, well, it should take between this and this. It's never been done before.
Right, and then I think that's information to say it's never been done before. We don't know how long it's going to take. Or has it been done someplace that's not in Arizona? Has it been done in Israel? Has it been done in Australia?
One of the things I think we can do on this list, some of the items on the bottom pertain to some of these other projects that are in state. If we do a Gantt chart, I suggest I just pull all of those off so we focus only on ocean desalination with an exchange.
Yeah, getting the water from the ocean to...
Yes, and I can put together a Gantt chart as a straw man and throw it out, and, we can have permitting, we can have, infrastructure, treatment, design, and we have several categories so we can see what parallel tracks there are as a guess, and it sounds like if nothing has been laid out anywhere near that far,
will be useful.
I can guess too, I suppose.
Right. Because construct the desalination plant, there have been plenty of them that have been constructed. We can say roughly how many years that takes. We know how many years it would take to design them.
You just don't know how many years it's going to take to get the power line to the plant or the conveyance system in place.
But then there's the EIS. We know a range of how long it takes, 5 to 50 years to do.
So that we're going to end up with a final report that says this is going to take between 5 and 500 years.
Okay. So we take that list, simplify it, put it on a Gantt chart, and put it there with the objective of saying, it's really a big effort, it's complex, it requires a lot of interaction from a lot of different groups so that they can see, but then also to show that this is something that has actually started on the process. Is that what you want? Okay. So 1 o'clock almost?
It's time to eat if you want.
Yeah, we
Why don't we take a break here?
Yep.
Please come up and enjoy your food.
I have a couple, if I may, let you know what's happening up there. A free-for-all, except 2 of the salads have been spoken for in a veggie sandwich. Otherwise, there's a couple other veggie sandwiches. There's 4 turkeys. There's an egg salad, a BLT. So I'm not sure if we know which is which. I did order a little extra, but I would say those that know that they RSVP to me for lunch. You go first, and we'll see what's left.
There should be plenty.
RSVP'd on time?
There should be plenty to eat.
Yes, we had leftover last time, so.
And I RSVP'd for Guy, and he's not here.
Oh, there you go.
One person.
I'll leave his then. We started having the good conversation.
Oh, what time? I don't think she likes to go until like...
Did those of us on the phone plan to call back in, or?
Cindy, what did you say? Should they call back in?
I really thought it was
Which call back in.
It's going to be like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
I think we'll only need
now.
Well, it might just be 10 minutes, we're going to pick up again.
Thank you.
Is it Holly?
Yeah?
Okay. That's it.
Take a break for October.
Should we what?
Mute it. Nice idea. Which side of it?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Here.
So I'm momentarily distracted.
So we'll mute the call for at least 5 minutes.
interrupt your eating or well, we do want to interrupt your visiting.
Yes.
It is Water Professionals Week. Would you tell us about Water Professionals Week?
It's the inaugural Arizona Water Professionals Appreciation Week, and it was officially declared so by House resolution on the floor yesterday. Representative Gabaldon sponsored it, and Orrin was there in attendance. And the intent is to recognize the work of thousands of individuals working in the Arizona water industry, not just those of us in the room, but the operators, the customer service people, the lawyers, the communications directors, everyone who helps work towards our mission to secure our water future. And next year, we're really building momentum to help recruit and retain individuals to work in the water industry, again, from all these different fields. So stay tuned, there's more.
And that is tough.
For, on the operator side.
Right. It's an aging workforce, and millennials aren't necessarily exposed to go and work in the water treatment plant. I'm not slamming all millennials, just maybe some.
You gotta make those treatment plants more like video games.
That's right. That's right.
There are more plates. Sharon, grab me.
You cold? I can talk more, it usually warms up.
Should we move on to the next item? Are you ready, or do you still want to eat? Or?
We are ready.
Next item on the list is the cost summary. And what we have for you to look at today are, we have a table with information, and then we also have a graph. When we look at costing this infrastructure for the various projects, one of the challenges that we face is that it's not specific to any project, so what we can do is try and put in reasonable ranges of costs. And when we come up with a cost, let's say we do reclaimed water aquifer storage and recovery, or whatever component that is, what we've included in the cost are all the components we can identify. So it would be wells, the treatment, storage, and pumping for delivery. If there's a recharge facility, then there's a spreading basin and so on. So it's not just a single line item. We tried to put in what would be a package deal. What can't be included here is that, you know, if this treatment facility is 3 miles from the distribution system, for example, we don't have that kind of piping information. So that's, the costs that we have here need to be understood in that context. And if you look at some of the other projects, for example, the ocean desalination, you know, we know from a couple different sources that the cost of that kind of a facility is about $2,300 an acre foot. But that does not include any of the infrastructure that might be needed as a part of the exchange, let's say, to deliver that water from the desalination facility to a city in Mexico so they can use it. And so I'm assuming there are additional costs that would be associated with that. It also does not include the cost of permitting or anything that needs to happen in the political arena. What I would hope people would get from the cost information is just to look and say, okay, ocean desalination is more expensive than reclaimed water direct potable reuse. I know this option with deliveries to multiple planning areas with ocean desalination, that's, you know, more than twice as expensive as everything else. And so, and if you look on the left side, it looks like municipal water conservation and direct reuse of reclaimed water are relatively inexpensive compared with these others, and so people can look at that and at least obtain an initial gut feel for what augmentation options they might be interested in or they think might be feasible in their particular situation. There are still some refinements I want to do to these costs. I want to spend a little more time looking at the high and low ranges. Another challenge is the capacity of the various facilities could change very significantly from one city to another. But in the report, we wanted to have a discussion of costs in general, and my thought was we would put some unit costs in so that we could have, for example, storage reservoirs or pump stations cost this much, or in a range. You know, here's the cost of a spreading basin and so on, so someone can see some of the individual components. And then we could look at a table similar to this one where we can look at a category of water augmentation, see what the different components are, and then look at those costs. And another thing that's difficult to quantify is the potential yield of a particular augmentation option. Things such as reclaimed water, for example, is tied directly to the amount of wastewater that a particular municipality has. Yet there are others that we have other quantifications, you know, desalination facility, we would identify how big we want to make it, and then we can look at what the cost is. These costs, and I put these in costs in terms of dollars per acre foot for the purpose of comparing them so that we can normalize them so it's not specific to a particular capacity. It is difficult to estimate operating costs. When I go to my engineers that are treatment process experts, I ask for a cost of this, and they want to understand everything about this plan and all these kinds of details that there's no way I can come up with at a planning level in order for them to give me a cost. So they are to be a fairly high level estimate. But I think they're useful in looking at one cost relative to another. There's another graph that we have a draft of, I didn't bring here, but it was an attempt to show a bar or range of the cost of each of these different items so you can see not only what we might call the average cost, but what the highs and lows could reasonably be. And when we include that, that's useful because then you can see some of them we might be able to define very tightly, and some of them could vary all over the place. So, do you have any thoughts or feedback on what you would like to see on costs?
Sure, I have a question, Richard, if I may. I think the word you used is a comparison of costs. So that as we're looking at various options, we'll be able to sort of compare one against the other, against which is the more cost viable or cost effective option.
Yes.
For example, are you looking at serving a new use as reclaimed water, or are you looking at replacing an existing use? Say it's an existing use of groundwater, let's say. You're going to replace it with reclaimed water, and that the savings of the water that would then be used for municipal purposes have some cost of putting that water into use. I'm just trying to look at an apples and apples comparison. So if you're storing water underground, as under aqua storage and recovery, you're showing the injection well here, and then you're also bringing it all the way down through wellhead treatment and delivery. Okay, I get that. But what about a managed recharge facility where you're storing water in, say, a spreading basin, and at some point somebody's going to be recovering that water through, say, a delivery system for municipal use? So, I mean, are you taking into account sort of a, you're getting into to the distribution system, let's say, so you're comparing all of these in the same way. It seems like maybe they're not exactly in that.
On all these, we would assume that this is an incremental amount of infrastructure, and really assuming nothing else is there with an incremental benefit. We have not included, let's say you take reclaimed water, for example. We begin with the reclaimed water as it comes out of the wastewater plant, so we're not including the wastewater plant cost. And then we go up to where we would have a pump station that would push that water into the distribution system.
Through a recharge and recovery. So you'd have wellhead treatment, potentially.
Yes.
Distribution, storage, pumping.
Correct. then if there's anything that's specific to a particular site or situation, like you mentioned, replacing something that might already be in place, we haven't included any of that in these estimates. So my hope is if someone takes these, they can at least use these as some building blocks and say, well, I've got this, but I don't have that, to do some estimates with the costs.
And will that be noted in the report, all of these assumptions around these estimates?
Yes, there will need to be a number of assumptions.
I'm wondering if both with the table and the graph, if it would be helpful, it's probably already well understood, but to just note the water augmentation cost as of 2019.
Yes, and typically what we would do is include an ENR number.
Yeah.
That someone could use then to reference the costs of today versus looking back at something in the future. Any other thoughts on costs? All right, let's move on to the water utilization section. Yeah, this is section 6, best practices that improve water utilization. So the items that we have there for water utilization are agricultural water conservation, managed aquifer recharge, reclaimed water use, and municipal water conservation. And we have fact sheets associated with each one of those. Give me just a second to tell you what page they're.
Page 1.
They're 1 of 36 on the fact sheet chart.
Yes. We've talked about these at length in some of our previous meetings, and so I don't think we need to rehash any ground that we've already covered, but I'm going to make a couple points on these. Particularly since there's some folks here from the ag industry. We looked at agricultural conservation in a variety of things in different ways, and while we're including it here, one of the challenges that we were faced with is if you conserve agricultural water, that doesn't necessarily give you more water for someone else to take and use. There's an amount of water that's been allocated to farmer and he uses less, that's still his water, and that doesn't mean that somebody else can come and take it. And so because of that constraint and the way the water laws are associated with that, we're listing agricultural conservation as good ideas, things to do. We're not doing it in the context of
More water.
Yeah, use agricultural conservation so we can provide more water somewhere else.
Mr. Chair, could I get a comment? I think that perspective is wrong. I'll just tell you from my perspective. An LAMA, for example, irrigation rights are fixed in quantity. They use less water because they're using a more efficient water practice, right? They can't farm more acres if they're saving more water. If they do reduce their use of water, primarily groundwater as we're going forward, that does free up a physical supply of water. In fact, that's one of the things that the stakeholders in LA have been talking about is how can we work with agriculture to make more efficient use of their water? It does free up more water, other uses. So I'm not sure that I would include if there's no
I don't think we were saying there's never a benefit. We were saying we didn't want to have a report that looked to agricultural water conservation as the augmentation supply. Even though I think there are instances where it is. Originally, when there was a little icon to show potential for agricultural water conservation, and many of those places where there would be potential, there would not be an increased supply. And in some of the places where agricultural water conservation leaves water in the ground, all it's doing is slowing the depletion of the aquifer. In fact, practically, canal may be the exception to that. So it isn't, we made this decision as a committee to look beyond ag water conservation as the augmentation supply. Without saying it's good. We want to encourage it for so many reasons, including what you just described.
And it was similar with municipal water providers, conservation efforts they do. That's all good water management, just like what agriculture does with water. We didn't want to give the impression that
in itself provides additional supply.
And we especially didn't want to give the impression that we just need farmers to use less water.
Associated.
I think state and federal funding is not in rare cases available, but it is available. Yeah. So I would take out in rare cases from where you put it in.
What page are you looking at?
On page 2, ability to finance. There are ongoing farm bill programs to finance water conservation.
You might add center pivot under your conservation, under your definition. You have laser level drip irrigation. I think the center pivot would probably be another.
Okay.
Okay.
This is Holly. I think I heard a comment about the funding for the ag conservation and that it's not rare for federal funding. That was the comment I was in terms of equip programs and others.
I had a couple of comments, not necessarily for edits per se, but just comments. So the recognizing on the first part there about the economically viable, that's appreciated because a lot of folks don't think about that you can't just do these things without any economic impact, and those still have to be paid, and if you implement some conservation, that you're not going to be able to do that, or you're not going to be able to grow a crop that's economically viable, it's not any good. So I just would say that just to recognize that I think that's a very good point in there. The other thing is, as was mentioned before, on the challenges, I think it would be helpful to, I don't know whether that would be under, I guess that would be under rule or regulatory changes, as water law sits today, I mean, there are many more reasons not to do certain things than there are to do certain things, especially if you feel like saving that water is then that water is going to be taken away from you. And I think that's recognized in your public acceptance challenges. In that language there that says the water say will be permanently redistributed to non-ag uses. I think it's very important that be in here, and that it is. I think that having the clarification of what the audience in this report is helped with a lot of my comments on this section in terms of this is just a tool to be made available, can be made available to local planning areas, because there's a lot of sensitivity with groundwater and things like that. Which is not to say that that's not something that should be in the report, because they should consider just the sensitivity there.
Right.
The one thing, though, and this goes back to my comment earlier today when we were talking about phreatophyte management, I do feel like that section there under the environmental issues. I do feel like that's a little misleading in the way that it's worded right now. I don't have a recommendation right now to change that, but I do think it's misleading to maybe to the reader who's not as familiar with on-the-ground resource management to say that fallowed land is going to be, returning to a quote-unquote natural state, whatever that might be, would augment water supply or save water supply. So I do think the wording there is a little bit misleading.
Okay. You want to think about it and suggest?
Yeah, I can think about it and suggest. I certainly can.
Yeah, you can just send me a wording you think would be good, then we can put that in. Any other thoughts on agricultural water conservation before we move on? Okay. Managed aquifer recharge is the next one. This one is included for areas such as along the San Pedro River where recharge is occurring for the express purpose of maintaining the aquifer, so this is different from an aquifer storage and recovery situation like what you would have in the AMAs with reclaimed water. And the idea is that you can do aquifer recharge anywhere where you have a supply of water, whether it's storm water or reclaimed water or some other source, and you're concerned about managing the aquifer levels, whether this is in an AMA or outside of an AMA. And so that's the purpose of the managed aquifer recharge. Is there any comments or thoughts or messages we need to include on that?
So could you just restate, and I think my issue with this is that a managed underground storage facility means a particular thing, and so using that in the context with recharge lends me to think only of that thing, and that if we are talking about this in a way that's different than that, I think that we need to make that cut somehow. So in this definition, you talk about regular storage that can be recovered through long-term storage credits, and then you also have urban enhanced runoff, which are two different things.
Right.
Because the UER you cannot accrue a long-term storage credit for. So I think I brought this up last time. It's smooshing a bunch of things together that if you're talking about one thing in particular, I think we might need to break that out into maybe two different BMPs, where if you're talking only about water that can not accrue long-term storage credits but can benefit the aquifer, that's different than somebody actually putting it in the ground and accruing long-term storage credits. Or if we're not even talking about long-term storage credits in this, because a long-term storage credit is not an augmentation because it goes in but it's going to come out, then we should remove the language, and you can recognize that the state of Arizona has a underground storage and recovery program, but if that's not what you're talking about as augmentation, then we need to split that out. Does that make sense? Because, and then saying managed, because a managed recharge facility is a very specific thing. So if you're not talking about that, then it perhaps should be recharge to benefit the aquifer system or something, and not use the word managed because of our managed USF that we have in
call
state.
it aquifer recharge instead of managed aquifer recharge?
Or maybe recharging the aquifer?
Yes, versus recharging to accrue a long-term storage credit that you're going to pull out later, which doesn't really recharge the aquifer.
Yeah, I think maybe just changing the name, then everything else can then kind of stay. It just starts making it
You want to change
different things that could be done as pointed out, but you're not getting it confused, because I had the same.
What do you think of the term, I'm reluctant to even bring it up, replenishment, aquifer replenishment?
Replenishment has its own, yeah.
All right.
Should we do this, define this in a way that we exclude whatever happens within an AMA?
But it doesn't just happen it happens outside of an AMA. We're permitting a USF facility right now for Payson, and it's going to recharge surface water. So it's outside an AMA, and it's a source of water that you don't even have on the list. So it's...
Yeah, I'm not saying exclude an AMA for the purposes of removing the terminology like the managed aquifer recharge.
But those exist outside of the AMAs as well. Okay. If they choose to get permitted for those outside of an AMA, they can. And there are many that are. Now, there are no managed recharge facilities. They are all constructed recharge facilities outside of the AMAs. There are no managed that I'm aware of.
Could you just say something more like recharging the aquifer efforts, or recharge aquifer? I'm trying to think of a new term that's not going to trip over and get people thinking, meaning what Jerry's concern is. Because I think it's just the title that needs to be modified.
Okay.
Well, and I've never been clear on what the committee wanted this to reflect. So if you look at the applicability and you're talking about UER and then recharges need to sustain aquifer levels, UER is an option. If this is focusing only on urban enhanced runoff, then how it's written is different, because that's all we would put in, you know, in the definition, recognizing it's something that is different than the underground storage and recovery that the state of Arizona has for either annual recharge and recovery or recovery of long-term storage credits, which I don't necessarily think either of those are augmentation. Except it is augmentation because it's a manner of using effluent, right? If you recharge the effluent and recover it, it's a manner of using the effluent if you don't have the ability to do direct delivery, so
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, it does augment.
So I've struggled with this one all along. And so I guess I would ask the committee members so under water augmentation methods used, it says in urban enhanced runoff and treated recycled water. So I'm presuming that means actual storage of effluent. And I know we try and not use that word, but just so I'm clear about what we're talking about. And so both inside and outside of an AMA, you can recharge treated effluent to accrue a long-term storage credit. So, but then up here in the definition, you have CAP water as well. So I guess I would take a shot at rewriting it, but I just don't know what we're trying to have it reflect.
I'd like to just provide a little question, actually, about the definition here, because the way it's stated right now, the intent is clearly for later use, but then there's a comment later about how it can also enhance stream base flows, and I guess I'm wondering if we couldn't widen the definition to say for later use or to enhance stream flows or groundwater elevation, so that there could be all kinds of reasons that any local area wants to do this that's obviously separate and apart from long-term storage credits, but the definition should be broad enough to encompass those different reasons that, frankly, are already out there, I think.
Well, here's a wild idea.
Okay.
The risk of all the different changes you've already had to make with committee comments. In the next one, we're talking about reclaimed water use specifically. What if in there you also note that reclaimed water can be also recharged? And then this one, number 2, if the focus is more, then the discussion about UER could then be separated out, and that could be placed under the Section 5 water augmentation ideas requiring further development. So then the best practices that improve water utilization would be ag conservation, muni conservation, and just reclaimed water. Does that help with what we've been wrestling with, or is that just making more work for Richard and Juliet?
Richard. Well, I'd be okay with taking the reclaimed part and sticking it in the reclaimed section. I think the objective of this one, as I understood it, was to do recharge for the purpose of improving or maintaining the aquifer without necessarily having an explicit plan to pull the water back out. And I know it's not written that way as it is right now, but if that's what the committee is comfortable with, I can word it so that it has the objective of maintaining the aquifer rather than using it as a storage and retrieval mechanism. And I know that becomes awkward because if you put it in the aquifer, it might get used later sometime anyway, whether it's from the aquifer, if it goes into a downstream stream flow.
Yeah, then you question, is that still
Augmentation, right.
I mean, it makes sense, I guess, under the best practice idea of you want to find ways to sustain the aquifer.
I think you could still do that and still put UER in Section 5 as its own question, because I think that is a substantial, frankly, opportunity for us that we haven't defined well, is the UER aspect.
Just trying to look at how to address what I think, Jerry brings up, I think, a good concern. I know we've bounced back and forth on this, and it's just another idea of how to maybe resolve the issue.
Simplify the document, but might not emphasize the need to actually do this practice for this reason as clearly as if you put it in the reclaimed section.
Can you state that once again?
I'm sorry. Yeah, but keeping it in its own section as it's currently written as its own best practice elevates the importance of this practice more than if you put it into the reclaimed water section and had recharge and reuse kind of together under reclaimed water. I think while I see that would simplify the document, it doesn't highlight this idea of enhancing aquifer storage aside from like LTSC purposes, right?
And one of the origins of this particular one came from some of the work that the Nature Conservancy is doing. And so I'm just curious if you could provide us, just a simple statement of what you see as the augmentation or the benefit of this one, or as you have been doing it.
Yeah, I mean, so along the Upper San Pedro, we're doing aquifer recharge projects that actually enhance both groundwater elevations near the river, stream flows in the river, as well as storage, groundwater storage for human uses. And yet none of that is through the long-term storage credit kind of system. So I think putting that out there for rural Arizona as a good practice and a recommended practice is more emphasized by having it separated as it's currently written here under number 2, whereas if you put it under reclaimed water, as kind of a subcomponent with reuse, you have lost that emphasis. And I think it could be very important for rural Arizona to enhance groundwater storage for all kinds of reasons.
So, Holly, along that line, and I agree with you that if the goal of this best practice number 2 is exactly enhancing aquifer storage, and it has nothing to do with USF or any of that, then it just gets rewritten that way, and some of this stuff in the definition that refers to recharging CAP water largely comes out because that's not really an augmentation. Recharging CAP water is not an augmentation, really. I think the only 2 augmentation things are this enhanced urban runoff, and secondly, within reclaimed water, actually having the ability to actually use more effluent water by recharging it and then recovering it, because you can't do direct delivery of the effluent, perhaps. Outside the AMAs, I think it's kind of a stretch. But to Warren's point, he said, should the UER move to number 5? It sounds like what Holly's saying is that there's enough known about it that UER could stand alone, and it actually calls it, it recognizes it. I'm just saying then it needs to stand alone, and we need to remove any reference that talks about anything that has to do with underground storage and USFs and long-term storage credits and all those sorts of things, and just define it as its one thing.
And I agree that all those other things need to be separate and apart from this, but I guess I would argue that if effluent in rural areas is being evaporated in ponds, that's the actual loss of water, and it actually in some ways could be considered augmentation to have that evaporated effluent turn into aquifer recharge water, and that has been some of the cases that I've known of.
Right. And so, but would that be covered as in the reclaimed water use if that best practice number 3 includes that, which I thought it did? Yeah, it says it has aquifer recharge treated recycled water down as the water augmentation method used.
Right. So the question is, one of these practices is a type of water, reclaimed water, and this practice that we're talking about are types of facilities, meaning aquifer recharge facilities, and that's why we're having trouble parsing between where to put this. Are we categorizing this by the type of water or by the type of project that's built to manage the water? And that's why it could fit in either place on the reclaimed side, right?
Right. Which is why I fall back to, what did the committee mean? And I was not when this list was made, I was not in, I had missed a couple meetings back in the day, and so I just don't know what the intent was of this thing that says that was an option that was aquifer recharge urban enhanced runoff.
Okay. The urban enhanced runoff came about as one of the water sources that could be used to manage the aquifer. Shall we rewrite it in a way that this one is specifically about managing this kind of recharge is about managing the aquifer, that doesn't really have anything to do with long-term storage credits? What becomes difficult is if you start putting several different water sources, then it becomes confusing.
But I think if you, in the definition, if you say this should not be confused with, in the reclaimed water, the BMP, whatever, where you are actually intentionally recharging effluent to accrue a credit.
Okay, we can make that distinction.
I think if you just, in the definition, distinguish between the two, then it wouldn't be as
But
confusing.
you would want the name still changed.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think anything that says recharge or managed is not good for this one. So it's enhancing aquifer storage, I wrote. What is another? Improving aquifer levels? I don't know.
I think enhancing aquifer storage is great. I mean, I think that is the name of the game.
Both serving the same purpose, whether it's for long-term storage credits or simply, just because there's a regulatory program that recognizes long-term storage credits for future use or ongoing uses, it just doesn't change the fact that you're bringing more water back into the aquifer.
But the difference is it's not really augmentation if you put it in just to take it out. If you store the CAP water into the aquifer and with the intent that you're going to take it out in the future, is that really augmentation? You're at a net zero, you're not augmenting per se.
Do we have a formal definition for augmentation for the, because I think that's what is.
So I do believe that, I don't know if there's a formal definition of augmentation, but the discussions have largely focused on it being additional water.
Yeah.
New water.
Right. New water, right.
Well then, if it's new water, we're going to have to take out a lot of the agricultural water that you're planning on transferring off of the river. Because that's not new water. That's just, every time you transfer water, that's not new water. You're just changing the place of use.
But it's new water at the location it's going to.
That sounds to me.
It is water that was not available to.
So I'm good with calling it enhanced aquifer storage. I'm good with distinguishing that from anything with long-term storage credits. Do you want to pull UER out and handle it separately in Section 5?
No, I think it should stay here. Well,
Yeah, I mean, there's different, I think if we're to change the name, then it's okay to leave UER in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And reclaimed. And reclaimed?
so I believe so, as long as we're clear that it's the purpose is. So Holly, the instance that you're talking about is effluent is actually put into, let's just say, the Upper San Pedro to plump up the aquifer levels without the intent of the person putting it in that they're immediately going to take it out.
Right. So, for example, the city of Sierra Vista has their environmental operations park, which has rapid infiltration basins, which enhance flows in the river and also help to increase storage within a cone of depression near the municipal pumping center. So those are like multiple benefits of why they do it. Now, I'm not sure, I believe that they're, in terms of their situation with the long-term storage credits in the long term, I don't know what they're, anticipating, but I will tell you that that kind of a project in a rural setting is the kind of project that I believe really would enhance aquifer storage for multiple users.
And, and in that location, obviously, there's no desire of Sierra Vista to accrue a long-term storage credit that they can recover at some later point in time.
I'm not going to answer that question for them, but regardless of their intention, I would just say that those are the types of projects that we are pursuing as a whole regional effort here, right, with all the different municipalities.
Okay.
Bringing in ocean desal water, and that's going to be used too. Just because it's used doesn't mean it's not augmented and stuff.
So they're still doing it, but they're not getting credits.
Stored.
But they're not getting credits.
Somehow pulled out. That's not really.
So that would actually be.
I don't know if we're bringing in desal water, 300,000 acres. So a new supply to the,
You can't tell that.
I need to use it. I can just put it in the ground. I'm missing that.
Any reference to
Water
using
supply.
your CAP allocation
No,
to
I get why CAP shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So, is there any more discussion on that once we move on to reclaimed water use? With reclaimed water use, in this one category, we're including direct reuse, aquifer storage and recovery, and direct potable reuse. And we encourage that use wherever it has not been fully developed and implemented. I think reclaimed water issues are fairly well known. Are there any particular comments or thoughts we need to have on that?
Chairman, one comment, Richard, under 7, under the applicability, where it talks about, part of the water supply portfolio used to obtain a designation of assured water supply. I think that's a little too restrictive. It probably should say something like demonstrate or prove an assured water supply, as opposed to simply limited to designations, because certificate applicants are going to be using that as well.
Okay.
Should be a broader definition of that.
Was he talking about adaptability?
Applicability.
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 Okay, that's right. We can revise that wording. Any other thoughts? Then the next one is municipal conservation, which we've also talked about a lot, so I don't know if we need to go into a lot of detail. I think one of the comments from last time was that there was a desire for a fairly comprehensive list of different things that could be included in water conservation. So we made that list longer, even if it's still probably not comprehensive, but it's at least longer.
I just have a question. What is a conservation tariff?
I have a question about that too, because I know under the MPs, and I know the Corporation Commission had really heartburn about including conservation-oriented rates or inverted rates as a BMP because of the difference between regulatory authority between the Commission and water resources. But I think if you're talking about conservation pricing or conservation tiered rates,
tiered rate structure,
then we should probably be a little more specific about that.
Yeah, it'd be better if we said tiered water.
Right. It's not one of the BMPs per se, but I can guarantee you, anybody that's implemented conservation-oriented rates has seen benefit used through pricing signals sent to consumers. So
I thought it was included in the BM.
No.
Or under the non-per capita, revised non-per?
No, it's not. Okay. Because the Commission had jurisdiction over setting rates, and they didn't want the department to be sort of, advocating a type of rate design that the Commission felt they had.
No. Yeah, not that there was a specific rate structure suggested, but using it.
No, it's not in there.
It's been a while having that conversation.
Yeah, it's not in there. It wasn't a matter of whether they should be using rates, because the Commission themselves are promoting that. The agency, the department, to be.
Okay.
Because then they ultimately would have to choose whether a person is complying with the form of conservation rate pricing that they would require.
I think this is
Sorry, you get into the weeds on that.
and this is actually,
You mean inverted rates or conservation-oriented rates? We should probably just say that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments on conservation?
Mr. Chairman?
Stephanie?
So I'm kind of going to go backwards just a little bit here, but it's related to this section. So is there a way to differentiate the fact that maybe I'm not right in saying this for the municipal, but is there a way to differentiate the fact that it seemed to me that both the municipal water conservation and the ag water conservation are conservation portions of this, not augmentation, technically? Is there a way to make that more more apparent, that since this whole thing is called a water study, I think it goes back to the ag question of, is the ag water conservation portion of the report seen as a way for ag to conserve water so that somebody else can have it? Or is it going to be seen as a way for ag to conserve water to sort of augment its own existence, you know what I mean, its own sustainability? Same thing with this here, right? I mean, you're doing all these municipal conservation water savings to make this sustainable. It's not really augmenting your supply, but it's making your supply sustainable. So is there a way to differentiate that in the report?
Is that what you were hoping by this would be not even, these items would come after all the augmentation lists and come under the category of best practices to improve water utilization.
Okay.
That's correct. So it's
okay. Good.
The only augmentation things that the report's going to talk about is brackish groundwater and the ocean desalination, and those we're going to call augmentation. The rest of these things, they're on the list for us to analyze, because if we've gone through they're not fitting the augmentation option, but they're best practice. And they should be somewhere here because from a cost standpoint, people are going to want to do these before they're going to do some of the real expensive options.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure that okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think from the municipal perspective, we were trying to suggest, hey, before you go and invest in a larger project, make sure you're doing
using the water as efficiently as you can.
Okay. Thank you.
And on the municipal side, if you look at an individual city, if they can take their gallons per capita use from, let's say, 180 to 120, which is doable in many situations, where there's a third of their water that they can reuse somewhere else, and I don't know of any reason why ag can look at conservation in their world in a similar way, as long as the water dedicated to ag stays for ag.
One area that I'm not quite sure what my concern is for the water yield. I'm wondering if we ought to put it a little bit similar to what is stated under the agriculture water conservation, and maybe start out by just saying it varies.
Okay.
And then you could say, for example, if a municipality was to reduce, GPCD, that had GPCD of 100 and was able to reduce it to, it could save 1/3. I mean, I just don't want the impression that, I'm not sure this will always yield 1/3 of a water demand by changing that GPCD. Because you're getting into the whole issue of, are we talking about residential? What about industrial, commercial use, and all of that?
So if we had some verbiage saying that whatever benefits you could have are specific to a particular municipality and their needs and what they can do, and it can vary all widely between municipalities, and here's just one example.
Yeah, there's one, for example, it could be possible, put some caveats in.
Sure.
I just don't want someone to then immediately jump on, look here, if those cities weren't, were using 120 GPCD, we'd have 1/3 more water. It's not
Sure. Okay, we can do that. Any other comments on municipal conservation? And one of the things I'm going to point out is that if you go to this other sheet that says water augmentation projects by planning area and planning period, there is a column here that says best practices wherever applicable. These best practices for this particular section are the ones that could potentially apply anywhere where it is appropriate. And the answer to some of these rural planning areas to say, well, what's in it for me?
That's some of them, that's it.
Yeah, for some of them, that's what can be done. And that may not be an easy message, but it's a message, I think, based on the information we have. Okay. Next section, water projects between willing parties. This section is really all about there are ideas that have been discussed, and we've narrowed it down to a few. Certainly there could be more, but the idea behind this is there are things that can be done that are good or constructive, and we should do them. They help us to move water around to utilize it better, but they don't necessarily fit in the category of augmentation. And so this is in section 7 of the outline. Firm water supply for lower priority Colorado River water users. Modify operation of the Roosevelt Dam to use the flood control space. Have an SRP to CAP interconnect facility and develop West Basin alluvial aquifers for recovery. And I think we've defined that a little bit more narrowly to be Harquahala. So that we're not really addressing the Butler and the McMullen Valley ones at this point. Are there any particular comments or questions on these we should discuss?
Are you differentiating permanently fallowing land from rotational fallowing, or is it just generally described as fallowing?
Well, we generally describe it as fallow.
Yeah.
Everything you mentioned is part of it,
Okay.
and can be the sole purpose of it.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a category on the other ones. Like, I know there's discussion about economics, but I don't know if it's its own section, but I think there should be something in here that identifies the economic challenges of that in terms of, local taxation, kind of federal program funding, lost economies. That's always a big discussion with fallowing, is how it's going to impact the...
Yes. And in this, we've tried to be careful to use wording. Let me see if I can find what it's used. We've tried to make it something that's temporary, voluntary, and with compensation, without trying to be specific about any particular one, to try and avoid the perception that it would just be taking water permanently away from ag.
I think even with the, if I'm wrong, but I think that where they've done that in California, they have seen, it's even a temporary, it's 15 years, and they even saw some economic impact. Maybe it doesn't go to the economic section, maybe it would be more under public acceptance challenges, maybe just local economies acceptance is awesome.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe it's not that, I thought should be included.
We talk about economic viability in all of these projects, but we don't talk about economic impact.
Right.
Right, so an irrigation district that has a reduction in deliveries will have an increase in delivery costs to the remaining users. Is that a fair statement there, Wade?
That's true, and of course, you have to look at it and measure it. There are also other impacts besides the increased cost to those that are remaining in the use of less water, fewer acres, for which the infrastructure already exists and must be maintained.
Okay, we can beef up the wording on that. The next two, modify Operation Roosevelt Dam to use the flood control space and SRP CAP interconnect facility. Both of those are ideas that SRP has provided. And the flood control space is primarily just operational changes within SRP, but it could be done in a way that provides flexibility for water users that take SRP water.
Richard, was expanding dams one of the considerations?
It was an idea that we had. And then we didn't pursue it further, and I don't recall why we didn't.
I think specifics were asked for, and there's just nothing to...
You know, don't have any specifics to go on.
I definitely remember at least 2 meetings we talked about it, and it was, I think, lack of specificity, lack of reclamation's ability to do any large reservoir projects at this point in time, which is really where all of our, storage derived from. It definitely was kicked around, and it never made it on there. And I can't remember exactly why, but...
Well, part of it was, as we look at these different projects, some of them are can-do. Some of them, there are difficulties. Some of them, there are obstacles. And some of them, we said, this just isn't feasible under the current situation, and dams got into that category. Just not feasible, because in many cases, we've been there in our recent history, and they've said, nah, not going to happen. And we don't see that changing to the extent that they would turn around and say, yeah, we can do this, whether it's reclamation, whatever it is, trying to do something like that done.
This is dealing with the fact that Roosevelt Dam had already been increased, and it's an way that they operate the dam, and I can't remember all the details. I just know there's a lot of details about having to get the water control manual changed so that you're able to store more water.
Yeah, it was just when the Safety of Dams Act passed, the Corps of Engineers came in and put in a lot of extra flood control space. A lot of, I guess, other places in California, looking at, we have a ton of, I think, in this case, we have like hundreds of thousands of acre feet of storage up there. So it's infrequent that you get up there, but they're saying now that we have better forecasting abilities to maybe increase how long we're keeping water in there in a safe way, and then put that to beneficial use, whether it's reclaimed or recharged water, direct delivery. Why not take advantage of it, since we do have better technology now than when that flood control space was put in.
Right.
So it would just be an operational change and environmental mitigation that would allow you just to keep water up in that space, for a few more months to be able to deliver water. And it's nothing that SRP is looking into, but just people out in California are, so we thought, hey, there's something that we could put on here.
But it costs money to do this, if I remember.
The only money I can think of would just be the environmental mitigation. Operationally, I guess how you recharge the water would be a question, or how you directly deliver the water would be a question, but I don't think there'd be extra money there.
I thought there was a cost involved with trying to get the water control manual. I can't remember what it was, because when we were initially talking about it, we were looking at all these shortages or the drought conditions. It's like, we're so far from
there'd be a lot of detail that need to go into it, and I don't know if we have a price on that, or if that'd be more internal or whatnot. Yeah.
That's more what I might be thinking of.
So I have a question on that under partners. The water bank is listed. Can you explain how you see the water bank being a partner, because we don't have access to surface water?
I guess I'll turn that over to...
Which page?
Page 18.
Well, that's the, were you talking about the Fermi, Virginia, or were you talking about the modified operation? It's on both. Yeah, that's on 19 then.
Well, here it is, right here, also.
And this, oh, that's got a different page number. Mine says page 19.
And actually, that we should probably add USBR and Corps of Engineers, because they would both need to sign off on that.
See, let's
Partners.
mine says the printed ones say. I don't know why. This is probably the ones that I printed.
CCR is the other one? Before, okay.
And it sounds like maybe removing.
Yeah, unless you had a reason, I just don't, I mean, we don't have access to that supply.
Yeah.
You know, maybe.
There's nothing that I can think of right now. So, we can take it off. Was there a second location you wanted to be taken off?
No, I think messed up because my page messed up.
Okay. Any other comments?
A quick question for the SRP related question. So you're saying that the flood control space that's there still has to be mitigated whenever you utilize that? Is that what you're saying, even though it's already established?
So right now, we can only store water in there for 20 days. So when that was established, it said no mitigation is needed.
Because you're only storing it for 20 days.
But if we're saying we're going to expend that to however many months it might be, then
Okay.
anticipate you probably would need something in place.
And does the mitigation that you have to use for that generally involve purchasing property that has water attached to it, or some kind of
I have
riparian?
no idea, and I don't think we've looked into that.
Okay.
I can tell you.
Yeah, primarily for water, for.
Okay.
Was that?
Yeah, primarily for bird habitat.
Well,
I mean, I think it is beyond, that's one of the main ones, yeah.
In the definition, you define NCS as non-conservation storage. And then in applicability number 1, you define it NCS again as new conservation space.
I think new is correct, isn't it?
It should be new conservation storage.
Yeah.
It's been defined as 2 different things.
Oh, here comes the gooch on that. There's so many acronyms like fancy chocolate.
Not in water.
NP.
that was new conservation.
Well, 1.2, it has new conservation storage.
Yeah, I think I know nothing about it.
Okay,
But-
conservation space.
That's what I thought.
We just need to make sure that that's.
Yeah.
You're gonna read the whole report, right? Good editing.
Jerry's gonna make me.
A fresh set of eyes.
Fresh set of eyes is always.
Unless there's other comments, should we move on to the next one? Next one is ideas requiring further development, and we've taken those out of any,
So, are we removing Harquahela? Or are we, oh.
Sorry, we didn't talk about that. I skipped over that. Are there any thoughts? Do we need to leave that here? Not leave it here?
One suggestion under cover groundwater and deliver to municipalities. It might be better to say to municipal providers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bring a private water spin on things in here, so. Under the definition, I mean, it probably is primarily municipality, but
That's the way the law is, right?
So this is another one where I've
so that's fine.
been
It's only
confused
municipality, that's fine.
about
Currently, that's the.
Okay,
what it is,
read my comments, Richard.
because the first bullet is actually transporting groundwater from Harquahela to the initial AMAs, which is permitted by law. But it talks about flexible aquifer storage and recovery. So I couldn't remember if this was also perceived as a location because it says develop. So if all you're doing is accessing the Harquahela and bringing the water in, that's not developing anything. It's not developing the aquifers. I guess it's developing the people who want to do that. And then that's not recovery, or is it using the Harquahela as a storage facility or as a location for storage where you bring water in off the river, you store it in Harquahela, you recover it, and you bring it in.
From the last iteration, the intention was to pull out anything related to storage, and we missed one here.
Okay, so this is groundwater transportation only?
Yeah, flexible
Okay.
aquifer recovery facility is what mentions standard adaptability. Sorry about that.
So why is it develop West Basin alluvial aquifers for recovery? Why isn't it just transportation of groundwater from Harquahela?
We can word it that way.
I mean, if that's what it is,
I think the develop is referring to the well fields that would be needed and the pipelines to bring it to the CAP canal.
Yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure that's required.
That's what I'm assuming is meant by develop.
Right, the word recovery.
so then it would be develop West Basin alluvial aquifers for groundwater transportation.
Probably.
Okay.
And,
Or is it just Harquahela?
yeah, develop,
We were going to just do Harquahela because of issues associated with the other two.
develop Harquahela groundwater basin, whatever.
And adaptive.
So then it's not under the definition. I think you need to be a little more specific about the definition that it's developing the infrastructure that would be needed to access groundwater from the Harquahela, transport it to the canal, and then bring it into the AMAs.
Yeah.
And then its applicability is only city, town, only political subdivisions of the state can transport groundwater.
Under applicability, right? It wouldn't be municipal water users, it would be municipalities, towns.
And CAP. Yeah.
So there was proposed legislature this session that would allow private water companies to transport groundwater, but that did not
Correct.
pass.
Spill and
Peterson.
And then on the adaptability, then you're saying you would pull that out, that aquifer storage and recovery facility. Okay. So economically, I don't think it would require the financial support of multiple municipalities. I believe that there are individual municipalities or individual political subdivisions of the state that are considering it. It's not, I don't think it's a thing that's recognized that they have to have, what's the word I'm looking, coming together so they can all afford it.
Doesn't require, it could be one individual.
Correct.
Municipality could.
Yes, it could, yeah.
It doesn't require it. Someone could go out there and buy land and be able to do that.
Which City of Scottsdale's done.
Right. There are entities out there that are trying to get multiple municipalities to buy into it.
Yes.
And they'll buy into one set of infrastructure that serves all of them.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you said would require the financial support of municipalities, that leaves it open to whether it be one or multiple doing it.
Okay.
You sound like you do this for a living.
All right, anything else on West Basin?
augmentation methods used for recovery. It's not really recovery.
So you'd have to take the APP for recharge basins out, the DWR well permit for recovery wells, because they're not recovery wells, they're actually production wells. They wouldn't be permitted as recovery wells. I don't know the 404 stuff.
They're not recovery wells?
No, they're just production wells, yeah. Because they're not recovering anything, they're merely pumping for transportation.
Even the service area wells either.
think you could move, it says land use permits for basins, the basins would come out, would just be infrastructure. Under list of anticipated permits. Yeah, so for, yeah. And then,
Why would ADEQ be a partner?
I don't think DEQ would be a partner.
Yeah, there's just things that weren't moved when we pulled out the storage components.
So then a third partner, that would be the political subdivision, right, that was doing it.
GWR wouldn't be a partner.
We're not a partner, but we would, depending on how they're doing it, we would do permitting. If they're just doing it pursuant to statute, the 3 acre-feet per acre, we wouldn't even really be involved. So then that rule or regulatory change, that would come out.
Any others then? Down to 2 or maybe, 3 items. It is requiring further development, and I don't know that we need to talk about this a lot. There's not a fact sheet associated with it. But just to summarize what we've agreed previously, is there would be a section where we would talk about the forest management, we talk about cloud seeding, and then we would now talk about phreatophytes, where we just have a paragraph or 2 describing what that is, what its impact is, and what might need to happen as far as further investigations or next studies to be able to do something meaningful with those with regard to water augmentation.
So one thought is, in regards to the forest restoration one, I think it's, there's maybe some different perspectives about whether forest restoration actually augments its new water supply.
Yeah.
But it certainly is important to emphasize that forest restoration, forest management is needed to protect existing supply. And preventing catastrophic fires is imperative for Arizona's water supplies. And so I don't know how you balance that, but I just would encourage that there be an emphasis about protecting, avoiding those fires and such, and just caution not over-suggesting that it's going to provide new supplies, but more the importance of protecting existing supplies.
Okay.
So we don't have to find new supplies.
Exactly. So we don't have to go out and find any more. We'll only need 1 desalination plant.
We'll get that too.
Yeah, we'll take it if we can. Yeah. I'm not going to turn it down.
It's a demand reduction. It's just not a demand in the sense of water.
And we always do some monitoring to try to understand
How much augmentation would be or not be.
Yeah.
But that's why it's section 5 and not the others.
Right.
Okay. Impediments to augmentation. I've asked Juliet to talk about this section for us.
Okay, so there's a number of legal policy and institutional issues that we've identified over the course of many months meeting in this room that are likely to be perceived as or are in fact impediments to augmentation implementation. At a minimum, resolving these issues could expand opportunities for water augmentation in certain planning areas. There are 4 on this list. They've all been noted by the committee previously. Think of them as a parking lot. We actually haven't discussed them very much. Our intention in this report is, these are very, very complicated issues, and our intention is to touch on them and acknowledge them in a paragraph or 2 on each, and explain why they are why resolving these issues would, as Richard said in the text, pave the way to augmentation. This is Indian water rights settlement, our adjudications, groundwater management plans, and aquifer management programs. In terms of Indian water settlement, there's 11 out of 20-some Indian tribes that have unsettled water rights claims. These claims are potentially amounting to hundreds of thousands of acre-feet of water, and that leads to uncertainty in terms of planning for our water supplies in the state. We'll include a map showing the areas where Indian water rights settlements are still pending, and then summarize how these yet unresolved Indian water rights, well, I think how resolving them would lead to more certainty. I'll just keep going. We can talk about it in the end or interrupt. In terms of the Little Colorado and Gila River water right adjudications, again, we'll show a map of these watersheds. As you all know, that's most of the state. And then include a brief summary on the status of the adjudication cases, and an explanation of why resolving these adjudications will lead to more clarity in terms of water augmentation methods. Sarah's not here, but this is obviously an issue that gets her out of bed every morning.
Yeah, so could I just make, I think the point that Sarah has made, this is not DWR's point, but just if you don't have it already in there, which I'm sure you do, the point that Sarah's made is that people will be either willing to plan or to make the financial investments to finance augmentation options until they have the certainty with regard to the magnitude of what they're going to need to have. I think that was one of her points that she has made a number of times in this room.
You're talking about all of these issues.
I think the 2 biggest ones that she has made that for was both the adjudications and the tribal settlements. Her comment with regard to groundwater management planning was more that until they do that, they don't necessarily know what their needs are, which is the same, but I mean, that's knowledge versus certainty. They just...
That's how I know.
There's a difference between 4.1 and 4.2. 4.1 says water right issues need to be resolved before water augmentation can be fully implemented. And 4.2 says why these adjudications need to be resolved before some water augmentation methods can be fully implemented. Are we saying that nobody's going to implement water augmentation lacking certainty on how these adjudications are going to pan out? Because I don't think that's, I mean, I understand that there's going to be some trepidation or whatever, not wanting to move forward and spend money not
right.
where you're going to be at, but then are we implying that no augmentation can go ahead at this point, even in some areas where they're still at issue?
No, I don't think they want to.
Still.
I think it's pointed out as something that is important to resolve as part of this process. Is that what you're saying?
And it's not just Indian rights settlements either. I mean, Pachuca is a federal claim, so that's not even
that's a good
Indian related. So, you know, where does that end? I mean, I don't know the Fed's assertion of reserve rights or whatever's going to, and that hasn't really been fully tested yet. So, I don't know. But, I mean, I understand the concern here, but maybe we should be using some similar language that this could limit implementation of some of the water augmentation projects lacking certainty on those issues, rather than saying can't be fully implemented or some of these can't be implemented. And so if you say some of them can't be implemented, then my first question would be, which ones can't be implemented? Anyway, so I think we could probably characterize it generally and still make the point.
Agreed. Federal Reserve water rights.
Well, and that kind of falls into the adjudication to some extent, though, doesn't it? Don't the resolution of the Federal Reserve rights fall into the adjudication? I mean, because those will be quantified in the adjudication process as well. So with the adjudicated watershed, that should happen, but there might be federal claims outside of adjudicated watersheds as well that aren't.
Have they asserted all their claims yet? I've heard even the states can assert claims too.
Yeah, I don't know.
We haven't started there.
How do you want this addressed in the report?
Well, I think the language you have says here needs to be resolved before water augmentation can be fully implemented. So perhaps maybe you should rephrase it as water right issues create uncertainty, may limit full implementation of water augmentation without knowing how these claims are going to be resolved.
So I think that's an awesome way to put it, but recognizing where Sarah's speaking from, she likes the needs to be resolved.
Well, I think,
yeah, because that's what they're pushing
you
for.
could probably say that, with this uncertainty, they probably do need to be resolved.
Right.
But I don't want to imply that they have to.
But they have to be, right.
Otherwise, 60-year plan could be an 80-year plan. First 20 are going to be just wrapping up the implementations first.
You're so optimistic. I'm thinking 40.
They're going to end there. They're not going to end there.
Then all the lawsuits after it finally.
Something's ended.
Groundwater management plans, I don't think I was at the meeting that this actually was discussed, but, and I'm reading off my own notes here. Groundwater management plans are at their most basic an inventory of supply and demand and management actions to reach some desired goal. It involves community input and a process for implementation and updating. Groundwater management plans have been identified as a need. Our AMAs have groundwater management plans. The rest of the state has data compiled in DWR's Groundwater Atlas. This was published about 10 years ago. The data's in there. These are inventories and not plans. So one could envision a voluntary process undertaken by a region. One can imagine that this is more likely to happen if there are carrots in the forms of state grants and assistance and sticks in the form of regulatory deadlines to make this happen. So for this section, it would briefly explain how lack of a groundwater management plan limits the opportunities for additional water augmentation. And that can be put in a positive way. A groundwater management plan would outline the augmentation needs and steps to achieve that.
So I'm trying to think back to Sarah's thoughts on that, and I don't think it was a huge amount of discussion. I do remember her saying, well, nobody should even consider any kind of augmentation, paying for augmentation if they don't have a groundwater management plan. There was discussion, we're never going to say that's a we're never going to say that's a requirement. You have to have that before, and not that there's monies available for this or anything. But I like how it could be a first step in identifying the magnitude of what their ultimate augmentation needs may be. And I don't remember anyone else really chiming in on that. Lauren's gone now. I think that was solely a Sarah thing. So she'll probably be the one that'll have the most input on those first three things that we talked about.
I don't think it was just so, but I think the point here is that If there's a planning area that really doesn't know what they've got for groundwater, it's hard to justify the kind of investments that would be required for this other types of augmentation until you know what you have and what you want to do.
Yeah, and what your demands are.
So a couple of questions on this section. So what is the difference between 4.3 and 4.4? Is 4.3 focused on areas that already have a planning area, they just don't have the information they need? And 4.4 is for areas that have nothing, or what's the difference between the two?
4.4 is,
Regulatory.
yeah, is to stop groundwater mining.
Okay, and then there doesn't seem to be any, there's no recognition here to the fact that the DWR report that created the 22 planning areas didn't identify that every planning area needed to have certain things in place. So is that going to be talked about in this report, or is it just assuming that everywhere in Arizona needs to have some form of regulatory?
Oh, you're talking in 4.4?
Yeah, I guess since 4.4 is the regulatory one, I think it's the way that it's worded there is basically saying that everywhere in Arizona is that issue if it's outside of an AMA. And if I recall, the DWR report that created the planning areas didn't identify every planning area as a priority for that type of policy.
And I cannot even remember.
I don't think the intent was to imply that it was needed everywhere.
Okay.
I think the intent was to say there are areas that are problematic, and to do anything in those areas, one of the next steps would need to be doing some sort of a regulatory thing. There's no point in doing aquifer recharge and any number of other things if there isn't a regulatory environment to make it feasible.
Because my question following that is that most of the augmentation tools up for discussion won't have much benefit to outlying rural areas, and so it's sort of like, the only role they're playing in this movie of this report is to be regulated in a sense, because most of the things we've talked about would be won't apply to them. They would be too expensive to help rural areas. So should we make a differentiation to say, the water conservation elements definitely would, but the augmentation, don't. And so I think maybe we should make it a point to differentiate where the priority lies in terms of areas of the state.
There's also a vast difference in areas that have meaningful supplies of groundwater and those that don't. The ones that do, right, the ones that where mining primarily a concern.
I don't even remember where 4.4, who suggested that. Do you remember?
I think it came out of a process.
Should the last two go under section 5? Water augmentation ideas requiring further development. If I'm in a rural area, I'm going to look at, I guess we're talking about some form of AMA or something, right? That's how people are going to take that, I would think.
It looks like a Mojave issue, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, but that area was identified in the report, right? And so was Cochise. But there are a lot of other areas of Arizona that are rural that weren't identified as where that was an issue. And most rural areas, as far as augmentation goes, most of those areas would benefit more greatly from the forest restoration, the free out-of-fight management, those types of things where they could augment their local watershed supplies. But anyway.
This is Holly. I just have to chime up on this one and say that, I think there are parts of rural Arizona that are doing replenishment projects that may, in fact, indirectly have to do with regulation, but aren't because, I don't think we should just assume that there won't be any recharge projects in areas that there aren't regulatory drivers. I think we should be encouraging partnerships that allow for replenishment through cooperation and voluntary projects, and I think there are some. And I just don't think that we should, kind of dismiss that potential.
Right, but I think, Holly, how this is written now is that the lack of regulatory protection for the actions that augment the supplies is an impediment to entities embarking down those augmentation activities. Is that why that's in there?
I mean, I think Sarah made that point at the last meeting, that about paying for augmentation, you know, do we have it up there, the analogy of our Groundwater Management Act? Sustainability concerns led to passage of the Groundwater Management Act, that CAP wasn't going to be brought in the state until groundwater mining was brought. So it's the same issue.
I just wanted on the record that GWR did not suggest that.
Well, I guess that's my point, is that that's going to be the fact that a blanket statement is going to be very alarming to a lot of areas of the state that are saying, why are we being sucked into this vortex? We're okay, you know, or whatever the situation is. I just think that I just think it should be a little bit more specific in that way.
I mean, isn't part you could offer here the suggestion that increased funding should be available for these types of projects as opposed to regulatory constraints?
I think that would help.
I mean, that's the reality of implementation, frankly.
Well, the one thing this report doesn't really talk about is funding in the perspective of should funding be made available, should we prioritize funding? I mean, we've largely stayed away from the discussion about funding in this report as a whole, other than identifying costs. But
is that because we have to, or just because we have?
It is because the funding discussion in every previous water discussion group I've ever sat in turns into a black hole of endless spiraling down into a pit of nothingness. Not to put a fine tune on it, but I have had hundreds of hours of meetings discussing funding and financing, and it's nothing ever comes out of it. Like the funding committee.
Oh, yeah.
They met twice, and we're like, we're done. Come to us when someone has a specific boots, you know, dirt ready to turn on the ground project, and then we'll talk about ways that we can get funding for it. Because in the hypothetical discussion, it's so incredibly painful.
These two are under the impediment section.
Yes, right.
So
another impediment on me.
We don't really know the precise circumstance that some of these areas are in. We don't know their supplies. It hasn't been modeled. There's no management in place. So and have we identified that they're going to be a beneficiary of any of the augmentation methods we've identified? I mean, it seems to me, and if you're saying there's going to be some management in here, and that most people view that as restriction.
Right.
But there's no augmentation benefit that's going to sort of offset that, the carrot and the stick, I thought I heard earlier in the discussion. I'm not sure where the carrot is.
Right, because when we had the Pinal AMA, we had the CAP, you know, we had something to offset, right. You know, and here it's just, we're going to identify what you're doing wrong and regulate you, but there's nothing else in this report offered to augment your supplies.
No, and I don't think that the report is identifying that anyone is doing anything wrong. That's not the goal of this, and I know in the comments that Sarah's made before, it's not ever meant to be prescriptive and say, you're doing this wrong, you need to do this. I think in the impediments, it's exactly, and I think it would be a great thing to add in the impediment that this says that they don't have a plan, but you also mentioned that no modeling has been done. There haven't been models done to allow people to have the ability to do groundwater. Maybe management isn't the word, but, you know, I don't know what another word is, management, if management implies regulation, but just understanding, developing demand and supply estimates. Right, and that's going to tell you what your needs are. And one of the impediments to that is we don't have groundwater models for all of the planning areas in the state.
And maybe funding goes into there as its own thing. You know, there's no funding source available for people to do groundwater models and that sort of thing if you want to have the funding discussion in there.
I think
that's exactly right. Sorry to interrupt, but the reason there isn't planning tools like modeling and scenarios is because there's not funding, which is also related to project development.
Right.
So does it make sense, maybe this is what you're going to say, Bill, to combine 3 and 4? And
well, I think, the point I wanted to make was 4, 3, and 4, there are some very key points that both of them are raised, right? I think they can be reworded in such a way that that management might be in there in some way, but I think you need to characterize it perhaps differently, shape the story a little bit differently. And I think what we're basically saying is, in some areas there are problems. Declining water levels, increasing water demands, without a way of assessing what the supplies are, without assessing, and there's no protection in place. So if somebody was going to say, look, I see a decline in water supplies here, and I need to augment our supplies here some way. But there's no protections in place. And so if a neighboring whatever is going to now start drawing more of the water that you're trying to find a supply to sort of fill the gap with and bringing high dollar water in, the last thing you want is to be able to spend big dollars and have, at the end of the day, somebody pulling the rug out from under what you thought you already had to begin with, right? So I think the point they're trying to make, whether they're combined, I think they probably could be combined into one, but I think they probably need to be reworded in such a way that it's not so much, management shouldn't be the first word that probably jumps out of this.
It's more like knowledge and understanding.
Where are we at?
Right.
We need to know where we're at out here.
On number 4, I see it also like if you want to augment your supply because you're running out, you don't have enough, but then doesn't that beg the question, well, what are you doing with your existing supplies? Have you addressed, trying to manage those a little bit better to try to stretch out the use of your supply?
I think all the things we've talked about earlier today, and talk about, conservation, using water efficiently, reclaim water, all of those can fit these rural areas as well as they can other areas, right? So I think all that is on the table, but I think when you talk about somebody's going to commit dollars and resources and effort to do something, you probably need to know where you're at. That's a starting point.
And none of them know where they're at.
Right.
So in this room, does management equal regulation? Is that the problem with the word management?
It sounds like that's the belief.
It does.
Maybe regulation needed. Right.
But I think knowledge is first, like what you were saying.
Knowledge and understanding.
Knowledge is first, if that's...
So the state, I'm going to push this just a little bit, the state has water atlases, which should be updated, which requires funding. They're 10 years old, but there is an inventory of water supplies and demands. And not all areas are appropriate for groundwater models.
They are not, and
so
I
we
would
know it's
say...
there, and the question is defining where you want to be and the steps to get there.
So what we're doing in the demand updates, we are updating in the old GWAICC, that was the planning area process, the intent was to go in and update the, at least demand side of things, because that work was done by the WRDC, which was based on data sets from 2005. So, and I would say the atlas is even older than that. So we're looking at 15-year-old data on the demand side, which we know particularly in Mojave and in the West Basins is not even accurate because they showed 0 acre-feet of irrigation use, and that's not the case. So I think that knowledge and understanding of, and I mean our supply side of things, we had that discussion before we started this process of will we prioritize planning areas based on demand and supply imbalances? Well, we can project the demands, but our supply information that we have is so large, it's for an aquifer. How do we break that down into a particular planning area and figure out which part of that aquifer is actually available to that planning area and to what depth is it actually available? So I wouldn't even say that our supply data in the majority of the state, obviously outside the AMAs, is wholly accurate.
So first step is to inventory supply and demand, which I think we share agreement, although we're losing supply. And maybe that's as far as this group's willing to go then.
And then moving towards some kind of a model or assessment of.
Well, I think what we're doing here is we're identifying what the impediments are. I think not, so we reverse it and don't say what we're going to do, say what we don't have, which is making it difficult for individuals in the rural areas to plan when they don't know.
So it would really be lack of groundwater management planning as well as an impediment.
Right.
Yep.
And you don't
That
have
makes sense.
baseline.
Or lack of information, lack of knowledge, or, you know, lack of data and information, I mean, whatever.
Great.
We're out of time. Can we proceed and do a draft report?
When do we want to get back together?
June?
You got the government shut. I thought they announced it at the beginning that the next one's like June 13th?
The next council is, yeah, not the committee meeting, yeah. The committee, the council is meeting on the 13th. And I did just want to let everybody know that poor Cindy deserves great kudos in addition to the consultants with our evolving process, because Cindy has been dealing with the Bureau of Reclamation and our grant that was written based on the original scope of work way back in the day, and now is having to justify and do a progress report on stuff that doesn't match very closely with the original scope of work. So she has done a great job doing that, but part of the shocker to me, once we got the federal money, was a month later, they're like, we need your completion report, because we were supposed to be done in May, which I but if you remember, the whole federal grant was very delayed and delayed and delayed.
Well, the government was shut down.
Then the government was shut down and we didn't get the money, and even then we were already 30 days behind in our approved scope of work. So they have granted us an extension until October of 2019. We figured it would take us at the most like August, and then we just tacked 2 months on to see, just in case, because we didn't want to be in trouble with the feds and not have this whole thing completely done. So from a time frame perspective, it's kind of, those are kind of the last dollars that we're using, but we did get the extension. I just got the email this morning.
Oh.
It was actually, you were probably up here. Yeah, they just
Yeah.
extended it to October, so.
You want to float some dates on the next meeting, or do you want to?
Do a
Let's float some dates.
date now, or do a doodle poll?
Do a poll.
Okay.
Anything else?
I do know that the senator requested that we consider not just this committee, but the other committees meet on Friday if possible when the legislators are in session, so that they can attend.
We're hoping they're done by June.
Well,
I can tell you that
It depends on how the budget discussions go.
but if we meet in May,
the third Fridays are not available, generally. That's when the Agribusiness and Water Council meets. So those are generally not available.
okay, I'll send out a doodle poll. I'll get with you, Wade, on your dates and facility availability and the team's dates. I had spoken with Richard earlier about what, if there are further comments or the action items that have come out of this meeting that people need to get information to Richard and his team, and he needs them by April 30th, so that's 2 weeks.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Well, just before we wish you a happy Easter if you're celebrating, if you were born before 1963, you may remember Walter Brennan in the role of Grandpa Amos McCoy. And he was known because he had a hitch. He limped, and everybody would see that. And Walter used to say he'd be out amongst the public, and people would see him and say, "You're not limping." Truth is, he didn't limp. And then he would say, "You know, sometimes I forget which leg it is. So if you see me limp, I sometimes am trying to remember which leg it is." Walter.
Or maybe you're just pretending, acting.
Yeah, and every once in a while I get reminded, it's not an act.
Thank you for lunch, Wade.
Thank you for lunch, Wade.
Say that. Thank you, everyone.
I do not admit or deny.
Thank you.
To the executive summary part, I'll just create a straw man, put it out there and see how people react.